Husband brought his dying mother to our home, handed me $500 and disappeared for 6 months. He called it a business trip. I called it abandonment. But he made one fatal calculation. He underestimated the bond between two discarded women. On her deathbed, my mother-in-law did not ask for him. She pulled me close and whispered 6 words that changed my life forever. Dig under the pickle jar. I thought she was delirious. I was wrong. What I found in that kitchen corner was not just a jar of pickles. It was a secret worth $50 million and a one-way ticket to destroying the man who left us to rot. My name is Zora, and this is how I turned my husband's betrayal into his funeral. Before I tell you what was in that jar, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to become the villain to get justice. The sound of a zipper closing has never sounded so final. I stood in the doorway of our master bedroom, watching Malik pack his Louis Vuitton carry-on. The leather was smooth and polished, a stark contrast to the smell of bleach and sickness that now permeated our hallway. Down the hall, I could hear Miss Pearl retching in the guest bathroom. The sound was wet and violent. Malik did not even flinch. He just checked his reflection in the mirror, adjusting his tie. I stepped forward, my hands trembling slightly. Malik, she is coughing up blood. You cannot leave now. He turned to me with that smooth, practiced smile, the one he used to sell luxury condos to people who could not afford them. Zora, look at me. This trip to Dubai is non-negotiable. The commission alone will cover her treatment for a year. Do you want her to die because we could not pay the bills? He was gaslighting me. I knew it, but I was too exhausted to fight. I had been up for 48 hours straight, monitoring her vitals, changing her sheets, and trying to force-feed her broth. He walked past me, not towards the bathroom to say goodbye to his mother, but towards the front door. He stopped at the kitchen island and pulled a wad of cash from his pocket. He crumpled it and tossed it onto the counter next to a pile of unpaid medical bills. There is $500, he said casually. You are a sous chef, Zora. You know how to stretch $1. Make it work, and do not call me. The international roaming rates are insane. I will call you when I land. $500 for 6 months for a woman with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I stared at the money. It looked like trash on our granite countertop. By the time I looked up, the front door was closing. He did not say I love you. He did not say tell Mom I love her. He just walked out. I ran to the window and watched his Uber pull away. He was checking his phone before the car even left the driveway. I opened my banking app. Available balance $12.40. The panic set in like a cold grip on my throat. From the bathroom, Ms. Pearl groaned my name. I wiped my face, put on my mask of strength, and walked back into the war zone he had left behind. 2 weeks later, the sharks began to circle. I had barely slept. The dark circles under my eyes were permanent now. The doorbell rang and I prayed it was a delivery of medical supplies. It was not. It was Andre, my husband's younger brother, and his wife Courtney. Courtney was a pharmacist. She wore her profession like a crown and used it as a weapon. She walked into my house not as a guest but as a health inspector. She was wearing white gloves, actual white cotton gloves. Oh, Zora, she said, wrinkling her nose. The air quality in here is heavy. Are you changing the filters daily? Bacteria is a death sentence for someone with a compromised immune system. Andre walked straight to the fridge and opened a beer without asking. Where is Malik? He asked, taking a long swig. Still making big moves in Dubai, huh? That brother of mine always chasing the bag. I did not have the energy to correct him. I was watching Courtney. She had walked into the kitchen and was running her gloved finger along the top of the cabinets. She looked at her finger, then at me with a pitying smile. Dust, she whispered. She then opened the refrigerator. Inside were rows of meal prep containers I had spent hours making. Organic broths, pureed vegetables, nutrient-dense smoothies, everything labeled and dated. Courtney began taking them out and dropping them into the trash can. What are you doing? I screamed, rushing forward. That is her food for the week. Courtney held up a hand, stopping me. Zora. Honey, I know you try, but home-cooked food carries too many pathogens. As a medical professional, I cannot allow this. She needs sterile hospital-grade nutrition. This is just a breeding ground for E. coli. She threw away 3 days of labor in 10 seconds. Then she turned to Andre. Honey, look at this place. It is not sanitary. Zora is overwhelmed. It is cruel to keep Pearl here. Andre nodded, looking at the ceiling. Yeah, maybe it is time we look at that state facility off the highway, the one the government subsidizes. My blood ran cold. The state facility they were talking about was a warehouse for the dying. It smelled of urine and despair. They wanted to dump her there. Why, I asked, my voice shaking. Why would you want to move her? She is comfortable here. Courtney smiled that tight, condescending smile. Because Zora, this house is a valuable asset. If Pearl goes to the facility, we can sell this place. Malik and Andre can split the equity. It is what Pearl would want. She would not want to be a burden. They were not here to visit. They were here to appraise the merchandise. By the second month, the $500 Malik left was a distant memory. The morphine prescription alone was $400 a month after insurance denied coverage. The electricity bill was overdue. The water company had sent a final notice. I called Malik every day. Straight to voicemail. I sent texts. Malik, she is in pain. Malik, we have no food. Malik, please. Silence. I stood in my kitchen looking at the only thing of value I owned, my knife set. It was a custom Japanese shunset hand-forged Damascus steel. I had saved for 3 years to buy it when I got my first promotion to sous chef. Those knives were my soul. They were my identity outside of being a nurse and a wife. I packed them into their velvet-lined case. I drove to the pawn shop on the bad side of Atlanta. The broker offered me $800. They were worth $3,000. I took the cash. I felt like I was selling a limb. I went straight to the pharmacy and bought the morphine patches and adult diapers. When I got home, Andre was sitting on my porch. He had a key Malik had given him. He watched me unload the meager groceries: ramen noodles, white bread, generic peanut butter. Eating good tonight, huh? He laughed, pointing at the ramen. You trying to lose weight for when Malik gets back? Or are you stashing the grocery money in a secret account? I wanted to scream. I wanted to stab him. But I was too tired. I just walked past him. That night my phone buzzed. It was a notification from our joint credit card app. The one Malik thought I couldn't see because he changed the password. He didn't know I had biometric login enabled on my phone. Transaction approved. $5,000. The Four Seasons Resort. Miami Beach, Florida. I stared at the screen. Dubai. He said he was in Dubai. He was in Miami. Probably 45 minutes away by plane. Spending $5,000 on a hotel suite while his mother lay in her own waste because I was rationing diapers. I walked into Ms. Pearl's room. The only light came from the street lamp outside. I had unscrewed the bulbs in the hallway to save electricity. I sat down in the chair next to her bed and wept. I cried for the knives I lost. I cried for the husband I never really knew. I cried for the stupid ramen noodles. Ms. Pearl stirred. The cancer had eaten her down to the bone. She looked like a skeleton wrapped in parchment paper. For weeks, she had been bitter, yelling at me when I was late with her meds, calling me clumsy. But tonight she reached out a hand. Her skin was cold. Zora, she whispered. Her voice was like dry leaves. I wiped my eyes quickly. I am here, Miss Pearl. Do you need water? She ignored my question. Her eyes, usually cloudy with pain, were suddenly sharp. Clear. I saw you, she said. Saw what, Ms. Pearl? I saw you sell your ring. Yesterday. To the electric man. I froze. I had sold my wedding band to the utility worker to keep him from cutting the power. I thought she was asleep. Why, she asked. Why do you stay? My son is not coming back. Zora, he is his father's son. Weak, selfish. I squeezed her hand. Because you are not him, and I am not them. She closed her eyes and a single tear leaked out. She let out a long, shuddering breath. Stop feeding me the hospital slop, she said suddenly. What the slop? The stuff Courtney bought. Throw it out. Make me the pickles. I blinked. Pickles. The recipe, my grandmother's recipe, the one I never wrote down. Get a pen, Zora. Now. For the next hour, between waves of agony, she dictated a recipe. It was not just pickles. It was a complex chemical balance of spices, brine and thyme. She made me repeat it back to me 3 times. When I finished, she gripped my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Iron-like. They are waiting, she hissed. Whom is Pearl? The vultures. Andre, Courtney, Malik. They are circling the house. I can hear their wings. She pulled me down until my ear was against her lips. Listen to me, Zora. When I die, they will come for the flesh. But you need to be the hunter. Prepare your weapon. What weapon? I asked, trembling. She pointed a shaking finger towards the kitchen. The jar. It is not just food, it is the key. When the breath leaves my body, you go to the corner, you dig, and you do not stop until you hit metal. That was the moment the victim died and the avenger was born. I did not know what was under that floor, but looking at the fire in a dying woman's eyes, I knew one thing. Malik was enjoying his Miami sun, but a storm was coming, and her name was Zora. It was 2 in the morning and the silence in the house was heavy enough to crush a person. I sat at the kitchen island, the granite cold against my forearms. The only light came from the blue glow of my phone screen. My eyes were burning from exhaustion, but sleep felt like a luxury I could not afford. Ms. Pearl had finally fallen into a fitful, restless sleep after hours of coughing that sounded like her lungs were tearing apart. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that sound. I was scrolling through Instagram mindlessly, just looking for anything to distract me from the smell of antiseptic and old soup that seemed permanently etched into my nasal passages. My thumb hovered over the Explore page. The algorithm, knowing I was connected to Malik, started suggesting people I might know. Friends of friends. Then I saw it. A profile picture of a woman. She was young, maybe 22. Her skin was flawless, filtered to perfection, and her hair was a cascade of expensive weave that cost more than my car note. Her handle was Tiffany with an eye and a heart emoji. I do not know what made me click on it. Maybe it was a gut feeling. Maybe it was the fact that she was tagged at the Fontainebleau Miami Beach, the same hotel where my joint credit card had been charged $5,000. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a slow, painful thud. I clicked on her stories. The first video was of a breakfast spread on a balcony overlooking the ocean, mimosas. Lobster Benedict. The caption read, "Breakfast with Daddy." My stomach turned, but it was the next photo that made the air leave my lungs. It was a selfie in a bathroom mirror. She was wearing a white bikini that barely covered anything. Her arm was draped across her chest, showing off a freshly manicured hand holding a glass of champagne. And on her wrist, hanging loose, because it was sized for a man, was a watch. A Rolex Submariner, with a gold and blue bezel. I zoomed in until the pixels blurred. I knew that watch. I knew it because I had saved for 2 years to buy it for Malik as a 5th anniversary gift. I knew it because on the side of the clasp, there was a tiny scratch from where he had banged it against a doorframe the day I gave it to him. There it was. The scratch. Malik had told me with tears in his eyes that he had sold that watch to a pawn shop to pay for Ms. Pearl's first round of chemotherapy. He had held my hands and said, "Baby, I would give up everything for my mother." He had not sold it. He had given it to his mistress. I felt a heat rise in my chest so intense I thought I might vomit. While I was here wiping his mother's backside counting pennies to buy generic aspirin and selling my own professional tools to keep the lights on, he was in Miami letting a 22-year-old wear my sacrifice on her wrist. I threw the phone across the counter. It skid and hit the fruit bowl. I stood up my chair, scraping loudly against the floor. That was it. I was done. The contract of marriage was broken. The vow of for better or worse did not cover this level of disrespect. I marched to the bedroom. I pulled my old duffel bag from the top shelf of the closet. I started throwing things in indiscriminately. T-shirts, jeans, underwear. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely zip the bag. "I am leaving," I whispered to the empty room. "I am leaving this house. I am leaving this life. Let Andre and Courtney come deal with the smell. Let Malik come back from his vacation and find his mother alone. I am done being the martyr." I slung the bag over my shoulder and walked into the hallway. My car keys were in my pocket. I had $12 in my account and a half tank of gas. It was enough to get to my sister's house in Savannah. I walked past the guest room. The door was slightly ajar. I told myself to keep walking. "Just walk out the front door, Zora. Do not look in there. If you look inside, you will stay." But I looked. Miss Pearl looked so small in that big bed. The heavy quilt seemed to swallow her whole. Her breathing was ragged, a shallow rattle that signaled the end was coming soon. In the moonlight, she looked less like the formidable woman who had once criticized my cooking and more like a frightened child. I remembered what Courtney had said, the state facility, the warehouse. If I left right now, Andre would not come until the weekend. Malik was in Miami. Miss Pearl would lie in that bed alone, thirsty and in pain for days. Or worse, Andre would come find her and dump her at the state home within the hour just to get her out of the way so he could list the house. I looked at my duffel bag. Then I looked at the woman who had just given me the secret of the pickle jar. The woman who had finally seen me. Malik was a monster. But if I left her to die alone, I would be a monster too. I dropped the bag. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. I walked into the room and sat in the chair beside her bed. I reached out and took her hand. It was feverishly hot. "I hate him," I whispered into the darkness. "I hate your son, Ms. Pearl." She stirred but did not wake. I stayed there for an hour watching her chest rise and fall, realizing that my anger at Malik could not cancel out my humanity. I would not let them win by becoming heartless. I would finish this. I would see her through to the other side, and then I would burn Malik's world to the ground. The silence was broken by the doorbell. I jumped, my heart leaping into my throat. It was 3 in the morning. My first thought was Andre. Had he come to evict me early? Had he found out about the pawned knives? I walked to the front door, my footsteps silent on the hardwood. I did not turn on the porch light. I peered through the peephole. It was not Andre. Standing on my porch under the yellow haze of the street lamp was a tall man in a dark trench coat. He held a briefcase. He looked nervous, checking his watch and looking over his shoulder at the empty street. I unlocked the deadbolt, but kept the chain on, opening the door just a crack. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice sharp. The man jumped slightly. "Mrs. Zora Brooks." "Yes. Who are you?" "My name is Mr. Sterling. I am an attorney. I need to speak with Pearl Brooks immediately." I frowned. "It is 3 in the morning. She is asleep, and she is dying. She cannot speak to anyone." Mr. Sterling looked desperate. He put a hand against the doorframe. "Please, Mrs. Brooks, it is imperative. I have documents that need her signature before she passes. It is about the amendment to the trust." Trust. Malik had said there was no money. Andre said she was broke. I began to close the door. "You need to come back during business hours, or call her son Malik." "No!" The man shouted it almost too loud. He lowered his voice, looking around again. "No, do not call Malik, and do not call Andre, especially not Andre." Pearl gave me strict instructions. This meeting must be off the books. I paused. The fear in his eyes was real. Suddenly I heard a noise behind me. I turned. Ms. Pearl was standing in the hallway. She was leaning heavily against the wall, holding herself up with sheer willpower. She was trembling, her nightgown hanging off her skeletal frame. "Zora," she wheezed. "Ms. Pearl, you should not be up." She looked at the door, then at me. Her eyes were wide with panic. "Who is it?" "It is a lawyer, Ms. Pearl. Mr. Sterling." Ms. Pearl's face went pale. "No, not now. Too risky. Andre is watching." She stumbled forward, grabbing my arm with surprising strength. "Send him away, Zora." "But he says he has papers for you." "Send him away," she hissed, saliva flying from her lips. "If Andre sees him, everything is ruined. The transfer will be void. Tell him to go." She was terrified. I had never seen her like this. I turned back to the door. Mr. Sterling could hear her. "Mrs. Brooks, please," he pleaded through the crack. "We are running out of time." Ms. Pearl squeezed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Tell him to leave, Zora. Take his card. Hide it. But make him leave. Now." I looked at the lawyer. "You heard her. You have to go. But go before I call the police." Mr. Sterling sighed, defeated. He pulled a thick ivory business card from his pocket and slid it through the crack above the chain. "Give this to her. Tell her I will wait for her signal. But she must not wait too long." He turned and walked quickly down the porch steps, disappearing into the shadows of the night. I closed the door and locked it, engaging the deadbolt. I turned to Ms. Pearl, holding the card. It was heavy, expensive stock. Sterling and Associates. Estate planning and asset protection. Ms. Pearl slumped against me, her energy spent. I caught her before she hit the floor, picking her up in my arms. She weighed nothing. She was just bones and secrets. I carried her back to bed and tucked her in. She was breathing hard, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. "Why did you send him away?" I asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. "He wanted to help." Ms. Pearl turned her head slowly to look at me. "Because Andre has cameras watching the street," she whispered. "If he saw a lawyer, he would come in here and tear this house apart looking for the papers. He would find the jar." She reached out and covered my hand with hers. "You have to be smarter than them, Zora. You cannot play their game. You have to play the long game." I looked at the business card in my hand, then tucked it into my bra. "Go to sleep, Miss Pearl," I said softly. "I will watch the door." She closed her eyes, and for the first time in 6 months I felt a shift in the air. I was no longer just the nurse. I was the accomplice. Malik had his mistress and his Rolex, but I had Ms. Pearl, and whatever was in that jar was worth enough to make a lawyer show up at 3 in the morning, terrified of my brother-in-law. I went back to the kitchen. I picked up my phone from the floor. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. I looked at the photo of the mistress one last time. "Enjoy the champagne, Tiffany," I whispered. "Because the bill is coming due." I sat in the dark, listening to the wind howl outside, waiting for the sun to rise on a day that would bring me one step closer to the end. And one step closer to the truth. The storm hit Atlanta like a divine judgment. It was not just rain, it was a deluge that battered the roof shingles and turned the driveway into a muddy river. The wind howled around the corners of the old house, rattling the window panes in their frames as if demanding entry. Inside, the air pressure dropped, making my ears pop. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. At 9 o'clock, the power grid finally gave up. The hum of the refrigerator died. The street lamp outside blinked out, plunging the neighborhood into an absolute suffocating blackness. For a moment, the only light came from the lightning flashes that illuminated the room in stark, ghostly white bursts. I fumbled in the dark, my hands shaking, not from cold but from a deep primal fear. I found the emergency candles in the kitchen drawer and struck a match. The flame flared to life, casting long dancing shadows against the walls. I carried the candle down the hallway, protecting the flame with my cupped hand. The house felt enormous and hostile. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps. When I entered the guest room, the silence was terrifying. The oxygen concentrator had stopped humming when the power died. I rushed to the bedside, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Ms. Pearl," I whispered. She was still breathing, but the sound had changed. It was wet and ragged, a sound that nurses call the death rattle. It is the sound of the body shutting down the lungs, filling with fluid, the spirit loosening its tether to the earth. I set the candle on the nightstand. The golden light washed over her face. She looked like a carving made of gray stone. Her eyes were closed and her chest barely rose. "I need to call an ambulance," I said out loud, mostly to comfort myself. I reached for my phone, but the signal bars were empty. The storm had knocked out the cell towers too. We were completely cut off. No Malik, no Andre, no ambulance, just me and a dying woman in a dark house. I sat on the edge of the bed and took her hand. It was ice cold. I began to rub her fingers, trying to generate some warmth. "You can go, Ms. Pearl," I whispered, choking back tears. "You do not have to fight anymore. It is okay. I will be okay." I was lying. I was not okay. I was terrified. But I wanted her to have peace. Suddenly her eyes snapped open. They were not glassy or distant. They were sharp, focused. It was that phenomenon they talk about in hospice: terminal lucidity, the last surge of energy before the end. She squeezed my hand. Her grip was weak, but her intention was iron. "Zora, I am here, Miss Pearl." She tried to sit up but collapsed back against the pillows. She swallowed hard, her throat clicking. "Listen to me. No time for sentiment. Listen." I leaned in, closed my ear, hovering inches from her mouth. The smell of sickness was heavy, but beneath it was the faint scent of the lavender soap I had used to wash her that morning. "The kitchen," she rasped. "The corner cabinet. The one with the lazy Susan." "Yes, I know it." "Under the jar, Zora. The big glass jar with the pickles. The one from 1982. I nodded, confusing flooding my mind. The old jar of pickles. It had been sitting in the back of that cabinet since I moved in. It was covered in dust and grease. I had almost thrown it out a dozen times, but something always stopped me. "You have to move it," she said, her voice growing thinner. "The floorboard underneath is loose. I pried it up years ago. You have to dig, Zora. There is a box. A box, metal. Rusty. Do not—" She coughed, her body convulsing with the effort. "Do not open it when they are here. Do not let Malik see it. Do not let Andre near it. It is yours. Only yours." She paused, gasping for air. Her eyes darted around the room as if she expected her sons to burst out of the shadows. "It is my legacy, Zora. My real legacy. Not this house. Not the furniture. The jar. Promise me." "I promise," I whispered. "I will find it. I will keep it safe." She was not done. She pointed a trembling finger toward her pillow. "Underneath. Pull it out." I reached under her heavy down pillow. My fingers brushed against paper. I pulled out a folded document. It was the paper the lawyer Mr. Sterling had tried to deliver. She must have had it hidden on her person the whole time, waiting for the right moment. It was wrinkled and warm from her body heat. The candle, she commanded. "Bring it closer." I moved the candle nearer to the bed. She unfolded the paper with agonizing slowness. I saw legal text, dense and complex, but at the bottom there was a signature line. "Pen." I grabbed the ballpoint pen from the nightstand. I uncapped it and placed it in her hand. Her fingers could barely hold it. "Help me," she whispered, "but do not guide the ink. Just support my wrist. If you guide the ink, they will say you forged it." I understood. This was a legal battle she was fighting on her deathbed. I placed my hand under her wrist, lifting it just enough to let the pen touch the paper. She gritted her teeth. I could see the sweat beading on her forehead. With a sheer force of will that defied medical science, she began to write. The scratching of the pen against the paper was the loudest sound in the room. P. E. A. R. L. She stopped, resting for a moment. The storm outside raged on thunder, shaking the floorboards beneath us. Keep going, I urged her softly. B. R. O. O. K. S. She finished the signature. It was shaky but legible. It was valid. She dropped the pen. It rolled off the bed and hit the floor. She pushed the paper toward me. Hide it, she breathed. In the box. Tonight. Before the sun rises. Before the vultures come. I took the paper. I did not read it. I folded it and shoved it deep into the pocket of my jeans. Ms. Pearl let out a long sigh, as if she had just put down a heavy load she had been carrying for decades. Her body relaxed, sinking deeper into the mattress. The fierce light in her eyes began to dim. Zora, she whispered. Yes, Ms. Pearl. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of the mother she might have been if life hadn't hardened her. My sons, they are fools. They chase gold, but they do not know the value of dirt. You know the value of dirt, Zora. You know how to grow things. Tears spilled down my cheeks. Thank you, Ms. Pearl. She closed her eyes. Go back, she murmured. Go back and dig. Her breathing slowed. The gap between each breath grew longer. 10 seconds, 20 seconds. I held my breath with her, counting the beats of my own heart. Outside, the wind suddenly died down. The rain turned into a soft patter. The silence returned, claiming the room. I waited for the next breath. It never came. I checked her pulse. Nothing. I put my hand on her chest. Stillness. Ms. Pearl was gone. I sat there for a long time in the flickering candlelight, holding the hand of the woman who had been my tormentor, and then my savior. I thought about Malik in Miami, probably sleeping in silk sheets, his arm draped over a woman who only loved his wallet. I thought about Andre, probably dreaming of the commission he would make from selling this house. They had no idea. They thought they were waiting for a death so they could cash out. They did not know that the real transaction had just happened right here in the dark under their noses. I stood up. My legs felt heavy. I pulled the sheet up over Miss Pearl's face, covering her for the last time. Goodbye, Miss Pearl, I said, my voice steady now. I will not let you down. I wiped my face. I did not have the luxury of mourning. Not yet. I had a job to do. I took the candle and walked out of the room, leaving death behind me. I walked down the hallway, the shadows stretching out before me like ghosts. I walked into the kitchen. I went to the corner cabinet. I opened the door. The hinge squeaked in the silence. There it was, the pickle jar. It was a gallon-sized glass jar filled with cloudy brine and ancient graying cucumbers. It looked disgusting. It looked like trash. It was the perfect hiding place. I moved the jar aside. The wood of the cabinet floor looked solid. But when I pressed on the corner just like she said, I felt a give. I went to the utility drawer and got a flathead screwdriver. I wedged it into the seam of the wood. The thunder rumbled again, low and distant like a war drum. I pushed down on the handle. The wood groaned and popped up. I lifted the false bottom. I held the candle closer, peering into the hole. And there, just as she promised, sat a metal box. It was rusted shut, covered in 40 years of dust. I reached down and pulled it out. It was heavy, heavier than money, heavier than gold. I sat on the kitchen floor, the box in my lap, the dead woman in the next room, the storm passing overhead. I was alone. I was broke. My husband was a traitor. But as I ran my hand over the cold, rough metal of the box, I felt a strange sensation. I felt powerful. Let them come, I whispered to the darkness. Let them all come. I was ready to dig. The silence in the house after the coroner left was heavy and suffocating. I sat on the living room floor, staring at the empty space where the hospice bed had been just hours before. The storm outside had passed, leaving behind a gray, weeping morning sky. Inside, the air still smelled of sickness and the damp earth from the crawl space I had opened the night before. I had scrubbed the floorboards, I had hidden the metal box inside the vent in the laundry room, and I had sewn the folded legal paper into the lining of my winter coat. I was exhausted. My eyes felt like they were filled with sand and my body ached as if I had run a marathon. But I could not sleep. I was waiting. It took 6 hours. 6 hours for the grieving son to make his appearance. I heard the roar of an engine first. It was not a respectful arrival. It was the aggressive revving of a rented sports car pulling into the driveway. Doors slammed, voices raised not in hushed whispers of mourning, but in the loud, agitated tones of people inconvenienced by traffic. The front door burst open. The morning light flooded the dim hallway, blinding me for a moment. Malik stood there framed by the doorway. He looked like he had just stepped off a yacht. He was wearing a beige linen suit that probably cost more than my car, a crisp white shirt unbuttoned to show his chest, and loafers with no socks. His skin was a deep, rich bronze from the Miami sun. He looked healthy. He looked vibrant. He looked like a man who had spent the last 6 months drinking champagne, not worrying about whether his mother had enough morphine. Behind him stood Andre and Courtney. Andre was wearing a tracksuit looking bored. Courtney was dressed in a sharp black blazer and designer jeans, her face set in a mask of critical evaluation. Malik saw me sitting on the floor. He did not rush to me. He did not ask how it happened. He did not ask if she suffered. He looked past me at the empty room. "Is she gone?" he asked. His voice was flat. "Yes," I said quietly. "She passed at 4 in the morning." Malik let out a long, dramatic sigh. He ran a hand over his freshly barbered fade. Then he did something that made my stomach turn. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He checked his reflection in the screen, adjusted his collar, and tapped the screen. He held the phone up high, finding the best lighting. "Hey guys," he said to the screen, his voice suddenly dropping an octave, becoming thick with fabricated emotion. I just got home. I tried to get here faster, but I was too late. My queen, my mother, she is gone." He walked around the living room, panning the camera to show the empty space, the gloomy atmosphere. "I was working so hard for her," he continued, wiping a non-existent tear from his cheek. "I was out there grinding, trying to pay for the best treatments, and I did not get to say goodbye. The pain is real right now, family. Please keep the Brooks family in your prayers." He was live streaming. He was turning his mother's death into content before her body was even cold at the morgue. I stood up, my legs trembling. "You are unbelievable, Malik. You were in Miami." He snapped the phone down, ending the stream instantly. The sad mask vanished, replaced by a sneer. "Shut up, Zora. Nobody needs to know where I was. I was handling business." "Business," I repeated. "You were at the Fontainebleau with a girl named Tiffany." Malik stepped closer to me, looming over me. He smelled of expensive cologne and stale alcohol. "I see you have been snooping instead of taking care of my mother. If you had spent less time stalking my Instagram and more time watching her, maybe she would still be alive." Courtney stepped forward then. The click of her heels on the hardwood floor sounded like gunshots. She crossed her arms over her chest, looking me up and down with disgust. "He is right, Zora. Why did you not call an ambulance?" "It happened fast," I said. "She did not want to go to the hospital. She wanted to die at home. It was in her care plan." Courtney let out a sharp, derisive laugh. "Her care plan? Since when are you a doctor, Zora? You are a cook. You chop vegetables. You do not make medical decisions." She walked over to the table where the medicine bottles were still lined up. She picked up the morphine bottle, shaking it. "This is empty," she accused. "Did you give her all of this? Did you overdose her to shut her up because you were tired of working?" My jaw dropped. "That is insane. I gave her the prescribed dose." "She was in agony." "Courtney." Or maybe Courtney continued, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Maybe you just wanted her gone so you could stop pretending to be the good daughter-in-law." "You let her die, Zora. Respiratory failure can be reversed if caught early. If you had called 911, they could have intubated her. She could have had another month, another week." She turned to Malik and Andre, shaking her head. "This is negligence. Pure and simple. She was too cheap to pay for the ambulance, so she let your mother suffocate. Andre shook his head, looking at me with faux disappointment. That is cold, Zora. Even for you. We send you money, we trust you, and you just let Mama check out because it was inconvenient for you. Send me money, I screamed, the anger finally breaking through my exhaustion. You left me with $500. 6 months ago I sold my knives, I sold my wedding ring, I sold everything just to keep the lights on. Malik laughed, a harsh barking sound. Oh, here we go. The martyr act. You always have to make it about money, don't you? My mother is dead, and you are talking about your little kitchen knives. You are pathetic. He walked past me, bumping my shoulder hard enough to make me stumble. He went into the master bedroom. Ms. Pearl's room. I followed him. Malik, you cannot go in there. He ignored me. He began opening drawers, pulling out clothes, throwing them onto the floor. He was looking for something. He looked under the mattress. He opened the jewelry box, finding it empty because we had sold everything weeks ago. Where is it? He demanded, turning to me. Where is what? The cash. Mama always kept emergency cash. And the jewelry, the pearl necklace, the diamond brooding pin. Where are they? We sold them, I said calmly. To pay for the oxygen tank. To pay for the nurse visits that insurance denied. Malik's face turned purple. You sold my inheritance. You pawned my mother's legacy to pay for bills, you stupid woman. You should have just let the bills go to collections. He kicked a pile of Miss Pearl's clothes, sending them scattering. I cannot deal with this. I cannot deal with you. He marched out of the bedroom and pointed a finger at the guest room down the hall. The room I had been sleeping in whenever I wasn't sleeping on the floor next to Ms. Pearl. Get your stuff out of there. What? You heard me. Get your trash out of the guest room. Andre is staying there. Courtney and I are taking the master. I stared at him. Malik, I have not slept in a bed in 3 days. This is my house too. Not anymore, it isn't. He leaned in close, his face inches from mine. You were here for a job, Zora. Your job was to keep Mama alive. You failed. Now that she is gone, you have no purpose here. You are just a roommate who does not pay rent. He turned to Andre. Put her stuff in the living room. She can sleep on the sofa until the funeral. After that, we will discuss the eviction. Andre grinned, rubbing his hands together. You heard the man, Zora. Move it. They began to move through the house like a swarm of locusts. Andre went into the guest room and started throwing my clothes into the hallway. My jeans, my t-shirts, my chef coats landed in a heap on the dirty floor. Courtney went into the kitchen and I heard the sound of glass breaking. She was throwing away the jars of broth I had made. I stood there amidst the chaos, feeling a strange sense of detachment. They thought they were stripping me of my dignity. They thought that by making me sleep on a lumpy sofa in the living room, they were exerting their power. Malik walked back to me holding a bottle of expensive bourbon he had brought with him. He poured a drink into one of Ms. Pearl's crystal glasses. Do not look at me like that, Zora, he sneered, taking a sip. You should be grateful I'm letting you stay under my roof at all. Honestly, you disgust me. You look like a homeless person. Go wash yourself. You smell like death. He turned his back on me, dismissing me as if I were a servant who had lingered too long. I slowly bent down and gathered my clothes from the floor. I did not cry. I did not beg. I did not fight back. I walked to the living room, clutching my bundle of clothes. I looked at the sofa. It was old and worn, the fabric faded from years of use. It was the sofa where Miss Pearl used to sit and watch her soap operas before she got too sick to leave the bed. I sat down. I could hear Malik and Courtney laughing in the kitchen. I could hear Andre on the phone bragging to someone about how much the land value was going to appreciate. They were celebrating. They thought the game was over. They thought they had won. I reached into my coat pocket and felt the outline of the paper sewn into the lining. I thought about the rusted metal box hidden in the vent just 10 feet away from where Courtney was standing. Sleep well, Malik, I thought as I curled up on the sofa, pulling my coat over me like a blanket. Enjoy the master bedroom. Enjoy the illusion of ownership, because you are sleeping in a house of cards and I am holding the match. He was right about one thing. I did smell like death. But he was wrong about whose death it was. It was not Ms. Pearl's. It was his. He just didn't know it yet. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in 6 months I slept. I slept the deep, dreamless sleep of a soldier who knows the war has just begun. The funeral home smelled like expensive lilies and hypocrisy. It was one of those high-end establishments in Buckhead where the carpets were thick enough to swallow your ankles and the lighting was designed to make everyone look tragic but beautiful. Malik had spared no expense. The mahogany casket alone cost more than the total amount of money he had sent home in 6 months. The floral arrangements were massive, towering sculptures of white roses and orchids that reached toward the vaulted ceiling. I stood in the vestibule, smoothing the skirt of my black dress. It was the same dress I had worn to my own father's funeral 5 years ago. It was simple, unadorned, and looked painfully cheap next to the designer morning couture that Courtney and the rest of the Brooks family were wearing. I took a deep breath and walked toward the chapel doors. My legs felt heavy. I was not just grieving Ms. Pearl. I was grieving the loss of my dignity, the loss of my home, and the realization that my marriage had been a long, expensive lie. As I entered the sanctuary, the hush was immediate. There were probably 200 people there. Friends from Ms. Pearl's church, business associates of Malik's curious neighbors. They all turned to look at me. I could feel their eyes. I could hear the whispers. That is the wife. I heard she refused to pay for the ambulance. Look at her dress. No shame. Courtney had done her work well. In just 2 days, she had poisoned the community against me, painting me as the negligent gold digger who let a beloved matriarch die to save a few dollars. I kept my head high and walked down the center aisle. I headed toward the front row, the pew reserved for the immediate family. It was my right. I was her daughter-in-law. I was the one who had held her hand while she took her last breath. I was 3 steps away from the front row when a hand shot out and blocked my path. It was Courtney. She was wearing a black fascinator with a veil that did not quite hide the smug expression on her face. Her white gloves were gone, replaced by sheer black lace ones. "Excuse me, Zora," she whispered loudly enough for the first 3 rows to hear. "You are in the wrong section." I looked at her hand, then at her face. "Courtney, this is the family pew." Courtney shook her head slowly, a look of mock sympathy in her eyes. "This row is for the bereaved Zora, for the blood relatives, for the people who truly loved her." She gestured vaguely toward the back of the church. "There is plenty of seating in the back. Or maybe in the overflow room. You would be more comfortable there. Less scrutiny." I looked past her at Malik. He was sitting in the center of the pew, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Andre had his arm around him. Malik looked up. He saw me. He saw Courtney blocking me. He did nothing. He just looked at me with cold, empty eyes, and then looked away, returning to his performance of the devastated son. My heart turned to ice. They were erasing me. They were rewriting history in real time, removing me from the narrative of Miss Pearl's life. I could have made a scene. I could have pushed past Courtney and sat down. I could have screamed that I was the only one who knew Miss Pearl's favorite hymn, or how she liked her tea, or what her last words were. But I remembered Miss Pearl's voice. "Do not play their game, Zora. Play the long game." I slowly lowered my gaze. "Fine," I said softly. I turned around and walked back up the aisle. I did not stop at the 3rd row or the 10th row. I walked all the way to the very last pew in the shadows under the balcony. I sat down alone. The service began. The choir sang "Amazing Grace." The pastor spoke about Ms. Pearl's generosity, her spirit, her love for the community. He did not mention her loneliness. He did not mention the nights she cried for her husband. Then it was Malik's turn to speak. He walked to the podium with a slow, heavy gait. He gripped the sides of the lectern and looked out at the crowd. He paused for effect, letting a single tear roll down his cheek. He was wearing the Rolex, the one he gave to Tiffany. He had taken it back for the funeral. My mother, he began, his voice breaking perfectly. My mother was my world. The congregation murmured in sympathy. Amen. I tried to give her everything. Malik continued, his voice gaining strength. When she got sick, I told her, Mama, I will go to the ends of the earth to save you. I went to Dubai. I worked 18-hour days closing deals just to pay for the best doctors, the best experimental treatments. I gripped the back of the pew in front of me so hard my knuckles turned white. Dubai. He was still lying. Even here in the house of God, standing next to his mother's dead body, he was lying. I sent every dime I made back home, he said, pounding the podium gently. I wanted her to be comfortable. I wanted her to have peace. But God had other plans. He looked down, shaking his head. It hurts to know that I was working so hard to provide while things at home were perhaps not handled with the same level of care. A gasp went through the room. He had done it. He had publicly blamed me without saying my name. He looked up, his eyes scanning the back of the room, finding me in the shadows. But I forgive, he said, because Mama would want me to forgive. She was a saint. And now she is watching over me. I promise you, Mama, I will protect your legacy. I will take care of the house you love so much. I will make sure it goes to good use. He stepped down from the podium to thunderous applause. People were crying. Courtney was dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Andre was nodding solemnly. They were applauding a monster. I could not take it anymore. The air in the room felt toxic. I felt like I was suffocating on the lies. I stood up while the applause was still ringing. I slipped out the back door into the cool gray afternoon. I walked to my car, my old sedan that sat alone in the corner of the parking lot away from the line of black limousines. I got in and locked the door. I sat there for a moment, shaking. Malik thought he had won. He thought he had humiliated me enough to break me. He thought that by pushing me to the back of the church, he had pushed me out of the picture. He was wrong. He was focused on the house. He was focused on the real estate value. He was focused on the visible assets. He forgot about the pickles. I started the engine. I did not wait for the burial. I did not wait for the repast, where Courtney would undoubtedly serve catered food and tell everyone how she tried to save Ms. Pearl from my incompetence. I drove home. The house was silent when I arrived. The for sale sign was already planted in the front yard. Malik must have had the realtor put it up this morning before the funeral. I walked inside. I did not take off my black dress. I did not take off my heels. I went straight to the garage. I found the garden tools. I grabbed a small hand shovel, the one with the sharp-pointed tip. I walked into the kitchen. The silence of the house felt different now. It was not empty. It felt expectant. I opened the corner cabinet. The lazy Susan squeaked. The smell of vinegar and old dill hit me. I pulled out the gallon jar of pickles. The brine was cloudy, the cucumbers suspended in time. I set it on the counter. I knelt down on the linoleum floor. I crawled halfway into the cabinet. Ms. Pearl had said the floorboard was loose, but when I looked closer with the flashlight on my phone, I saw that it was actually a loose brick. The back of the cabinet was lined with old red bricks, a stylistic choice from the original construction in the 20s. One brick in the far corner was slightly higher than the others. I jammed the tip of the shovel into the grout line surrounding the brick. The grout crumbled easily. It was just packed sand, not cement. Ms. Pearl must have chiseled it out years ago and refilled it. I leveraged the shovel. I pushed down with all my weight. Something gave. The brick popped up with a grinding sound. I pulled it out and set it aside. I shone the light into the hole. It was deep, dark, and at the bottom, nestled in the dirt, was the metal box. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This was it. This was the thing Malik had missed while he was busy checking his hair in the mirror. This was the thing Andre had missed while he was measuring the square footage of the living room. I reached down. The hole was tight. The metal was cold and rough against my fingertips. I hooked my fingers under the rusted handle on the lid. I pulled. It did not budge. It was heavy, much heavier than I expected. I braced my feet against the cabinet frame. I gritted my teeth. I pulled again, putting my back into it. "Come on," I grunted. "Come on." With a sucking sound, the box broke free from the earth that had held it for decades. I dragged it out, scraping it across the cabinet floor. I pulled it into the middle of the kitchen. It was an old military ammunition box painted olive drab but rusted to a deep brown in places. It was locked with a heavy padlock. I sat back on my heels, breathing hard, sweating in my funeral dress. I stared at the box. Malik was at the cemetery right now, probably throwing a rose onto the casket and checking his watch. He thought he was burying his mother. He didn't know that he was actually burying himself. And I had just dug up the shovel. I reached for the hammer I had brought from the garage. I did not have the key. Ms. Pearl had given me a key to a safe deposit box, but not this box. I raised the hammer. One strike. That was for the $500. Clang. Two strikes. That was for the Rolex. Clang. Three strikes. That was for every time Courtney looked at me like I was dirt. The padlock twisted. The hasp broke. I took a deep breath. My hands were trembling, but my mind was clear. I reached out and lifted the heavy metal lid. The rusty hinge of the ammunition box groaned like a dying animal as I forced the lid back. My hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped the flashlight. The air in the kitchen was thick with the smell of oxidized metal and the damp earth I had just disturbed. I held my breath, waiting for the glint of gold or the green stack of cash that would solve all my problems. I was ready to see the jewelry Malik had accused me of stealing. I was ready to see the savings account passbooks Andre had been salivating over. But when the light hit the interior of the box, my heart plummeted into my stomach. There was no gold, there was no jewelry, there was no cash. It was empty. No, wait. It was not empty. It was worse than empty. It was filled with trash. I sat back on my heels, staring into the box, with a mixture of confusion and devastating disappointment. Inside lay three items: a thick leather-bound book that looked like it had survived a flood, a small silver key that looked like it belonged to a child's diary, and a single folded piece of yellowed legal paper. "Is this it?" I whispered to the empty kitchen. "Is this the legacy Ms. Pearl died protecting?" Old paper. I felt a surge of anger. Had she been senile after all? Had the cancer spread to her brain, causing her to believe that her old grocery lists were treasure? I had risked everything. I had skipped the burial. I had destroyed the kitchen floor. For this. I reached in and pulled out the leather book. It was heavy. The cover was cracked and peeling. I opened it carefully, the binding cracking loud in the silence. It was a ledger. An accounting book. I flipped to the first page. The date at the top read, March 12th, 1980. The handwriting was Miss Pearl's, but it was different. It was stronger, sharper. It was the handwriting of a young woman with a purpose. Entry 1. 200 pounds of cucumbers, 5 gallons of vinegar, 50 pounds of dill, cost $40, sold at Church Bazaar for $80, profit $40. I frowned. Cucumbers. Dill. I flipped forward a few pages to 1982. Entry 50. Supplied to Johnson's IBQ Shack. 500 jars. Profit $2,000. Note: Mr. Johnson says customers are asking for the spicy blend. Need to increase pepper production. I flipped further. 1985. 1990. The numbers were getting bigger. The list of buyers was growing. Local grocery stores, regional distributors, chain restaurants. I stopped on a page from 1995. There was a sketch taped to the page. It was a drawing of a logo. A silhouette of a woman with an afro stirring a pot with the words, "Southern Soul Pickles," arched over her head. My blood ran cold. I knew that logo. Everyone in Atlanta knew that logo. Southern Soul Pickles was not just a brand, it was an institution. You could not go to a grocery store in the South without seeing those jars. They were on the tables of every barbecue joint from Memphis to Savannah. They were famous. I scrambled up from the floor, my knees sliding on the linoleum. I ran to the refrigerator. Malik loved pickles. He ate them with every sandwich. I ripped the fridge door open and grabbed the jar from the door shelf. There it was. The silhouette, the afro, the name, Southern Soul Pickles. I looked at the jar in my hand, then back at the ledger on the floor. Ms. Pearl was not just a housewife who made good preserves. Ms. Pearl was Southern Soul Pickles. But how? The owner of the company was a man named Mr. White. Everyone knew that. He was the face of the brand. I dropped the jar on the counter and ran back to the box. I grabbed the folded yellow paper. My hands were shaking so hard I almost tore it. It was a notarized affidavit dated 1980. It read, "I, Pearl Brooks, being of sound mind, hereby enter into a silent partnership with Mr. Thomas White. To protect my assets from the gambling debts of my husband and to ensure the future security of my children, I designate Mr. White as the public face of Southern Soul Enterprises. However, I retain 51% ownership of all stocks, assets, and intellectual property. This agreement is binding and can only be dissolved upon my death or by my written decree." I gasped. She had hidden it. She had hidden her empire. I read the next paragraph. "My husband is a fool with money. If he knows I have this, he will gamble it away. My sons are lazy. If they know they are rich, they will never work. They will become peacocks strutting in feathers they did not grow. I will give them a comfortable life, but I will not give them the company until they prove they can build something of their own." She had watched them. For 40 years, she had watched Malik and Andre grow up. She had watched them fail. She had watched them become the exact men she feared they would be. Peacocks. So she kept the secret. She let them think she was living on a pension. She let them think she was poor. I looked at the last item in the box. The silver key. Attached to it was a tag with an address and a number. First National Bank of Atlanta. Box 404. That was where the stock certificates were. That was where the real will was. That was where the 51% controlling interest of a multi-million-dollar company sat waiting. I sat there on the kitchen floor surrounded by dirt and debris, and I started to laugh. It was a wild, hysterical sound. Malik had left her to die because he thought she was a financial burden. He had gone to Miami to spend $5,000 on a credit card, thinking he was a big shot. Meanwhile, the woman he was neglecting was worth more than he could earn in 10 lifetimes. And she had left it all to me. I looked at the bottom of the affidavit. There was a handwritten note in blue ink, freshly written. It matched the shaky handwriting I had seen on her deathbed. "To the one who digs. If you are reading this, it means you listened when no one else did. It means you are not afraid to get your hands dirty. My sons want the fruit, but they hate the roots. You, Zora, you watered the roots when they were dry. The company is yours. The house is yours. Use the key. Take the throne. And burn the peacocks. Burn the peacocks." I pressed the paper to my chest. Tears streamed down my face. She had played the longest game in history. She had endured decades of silence, decades of watching her husband and then her sons disrespect her just to protect the legacy. And in the end, she chose the sous chef. She chose the outsider. Suddenly, a sound cut through my euphoria. The crunch of gravel. Headlights swept across the kitchen window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The car door slammed. Malik. He was back early. He must have skipped the burial too, or maybe he just wanted to come back to start selling the furniture. Panic surged through me. If he saw the hole in the cabinet, If he saw the box, if he saw the ledger, he would kill me. I knew it with absolute certainty. If Malik knew that $50 million was sitting on his kitchen floor, he would bury me in that hole and never look back. I scrambled into action. I threw the ledger, the key, and the affidavit back into the metal box. I shoved the lid down. I pushed the box back into the dark hole under the cabinet. It scraped loudly against the brick. Shh, I hissed. I grabbed the loose brick and jammed it back into place. I swept the dirt and crumbled grout over the seams with my bare hands, trying to blend it in. I heard the key turning in the front door lock. I grabbed the gallon jar of pickles, the decoy jar, from the cabinet and slammed it down over the loose brick. The front door opened. Zora Malik's voice boomed through the hallway. "Where are you?" I stood up. I wiped my dusty hands on my black funeral dress. I grabbed a rag and frantically wiped the sweat from my forehead. "I am in the kitchen," I called out. My voice sounded surprisingly steady. Malik walked in. He had loosened his tie. He looked annoyed. "Why did you leave?" he demanded. "You embarrassed me, Zora." People were asking why the widow ran out like her hair was on fire. He walked to the fridge and opened it, grabbing a beer. He did not look at the floor. He did not look at the corner cabinet. "I felt sick," I said, leaning against the counter to hide the trembling of my legs. "I needed air." He scoffed, popping the tab on his beer. "You are weak. You have always been weak. That is why you will never be successful. You let your emotions rule you." He took a long swig of beer and looked around the kitchen. "By the way, the realtor is coming in an hour. I want this kitchen spotless. Clean out these cabinets. Throw away all this old junk Mama kept, especially those nasty pickles. I hate the smell of this place." He gestured with his beer bottle right at the jar I had just used to hide his fortune. "Throw it all out, Zora. We are purging the past." I looked at him. I looked at the man who was standing 3 feet away from a legacy that would have made him a king, and he was telling me to throw it in the trash. "Yes, Malik," I said, a small, cold smile playing on my lips. "I will clean it all up. I will take care of everything." He grunted and walked out of the room, heading toward the master bedroom to count his imaginary money. I stood alone in the kitchen. I looked at the pickle jar. I was not just going to clean the house, I was going to clean him out. I waited until I heard his bedroom door close. Then I reached into the cabinet, moved the jar, and pulled the metal box out again. I could not leave it here. It was too dangerous. I ran to the laundry room. I pulled the dryer away from the wall. There was a vent access panel there that I had used to hide my cash tips years ago. I shoved the box inside the wall cavity and pushed the dryer back. I was safe. The secret was safe. Now all I had to do was wait for the lawyer. And wait for the moment when I could look Malik in the eye and tell him that the pickles he despised were the only thing he was ever going to own. I walked back to the kitchen and started scrubbing the floor. I scrubbed away the dirt from the hole. I scrubbed away the evidence. And with every stroke of the brush, I planned his destruction. The smell of bleach was still stinging my nostrils when Malik walked back into the kitchen. He had changed out of his suit into casual clothes, but they were the kind of casual clothes that cost more than my entire wardrobe. Designer sweatpants, a polo shirt with a logo the size of a fist. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery, and in his mind he had. He was holding a thick manila envelope. He tossed it onto the kitchen island. It landed with a heavy slap right next to the spot where I had just scrubbed away the evidence of the hidden floorboard. I stopped wiping the counter and looked at it. "What is this, Malik?" I asked, though I already knew. My heart was beating a steady rhythm against my ribs, not of fear, but of anticipation. He leaned against the refrigerator, crossing his arms. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "It is your freedom, Zora." I dried my hands on a dish towel. "My freedom." He nodded, gesturing to the envelope with his chin. "Divorce papers. My lawyer drew them up while I was in Miami. I was going to wait until after the funeral, but honestly, seeing you mope around the house today looking like a tragic charity case made me realize there is no point in dragging this out." I reached out and opened the envelope. I pulled out the document. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Malik continued talking, his voice casual, as if he were discussing the weather. I am being generous, Zora. I am not asking for alimony, even though technically I supported you for years while you played chef. I am letting you walk away with a clean slate. No debts. No strings. Supported me. The audacity almost made me laugh. I had paid the electric bill for the last 6 months. I had bought his mother's diapers. I had fed us on $12 a week. But I kept my face blank. And the house I asked, looking up at him. He smirked. That is the best part. I already sold it. My hand froze on the paper. Sold it. Signed the contract an hour ago. Electronically, he bragged, puffing out his chest. A developer from Buckhead. They are going to tear this old shack down and put up luxury townhomes. $1.5 million, Zora. Cash offer. Closing in 30 days. $1.5 million. He had sold a house he did not own. He had sold a house that legally belonged to me, thanks to the paper currently sewn into the lining of my coat. He was walking into a felony fraud charge, and he was bragging about it. I see, I said quietly. And where do I fit into this $1.5 million future? Malik laughed. It was a cruel sound. You don't. That is my inheritance. That is Brooks' family money. You are a Brooks by marriage, Zora, and that marriage ends the moment you sign that paper. He walked over to the counter and tapped a specific paragraph in the document. But like I said, I am generous. I know you have that old Honda Civic in the driveway, the one with the dent in the bumper. It is in my name, but I am willing to sign the title over to you. Consider it a parting gift. A severance package for your services as whatever you were. Nurse. Maid. He paused, looking me up and down. So here is the deal. You sign the papers now, waiving all claims to the property and the estate. You take the Honda, and you get out. Tonight. Tonight. Yes. I want you gone before the sun goes down. Courtney and Andre are coming over later to celebrate the sale. I do not want you lurking in the corners, bringing down the vibe. I looked at the pen he had placed on top of the papers. It was a cheap plastic pen. In any other universe, I would have fought. I would have screamed. I would have torn the papers in half and thrown them in his face. I would have told him about the nights I cleaned his mother's vomit while he was partying in Miami. I would have demanded half of everything. But I remembered the metal box hidden in the laundry vent. I remembered the stock certificates. I remembered the $50 million. If I fought him now, he might get suspicious. If I refused to sign, he might start digging. He might wonder why I was so attached to a house I supposedly hated. He might find the box. I needed him to think I was defeated. I needed him to think he had won so completely that he would stop looking at me. I picked up the pen. Malik blinked. He looked surprised. He had expected a fight. He had prepared a whole speech about how I was ungrateful and how I would never survive without him. He was ready for tears. He was ready for begging. I clicked the pen. You are giving me the car, I asked, confirming one last time. Yes, he said, narrowing his eyes. The car and your personal effects. That is it. And if I sign this, you will never contact me again. Never, he said quickly. I will block your number before you back out of the driveway. Good, I said. I bent over the island. I signed my name with a flourish. Zora Brooks. I straightened up and slid the papers across the marble countertop toward him. Done. Malik stared at the signature. He looked almost disappointed that it had been so easy. He picked up the papers, checking them as if he thought I might have written a curse word instead of my name. Well, he said, clearing his throat. Okay then. That was smart of you. At least you know when you are beaten. He reached into his pocket and fished out a set of keys. He tossed them onto the counter. The title is in the glove box. I already signed it. Don't say I never gave you anything. I picked up the keys. They felt cold and heavy in my hand. They were the keys to my freedom. I am going to pack, I said, turning away from him. Make it quick, he called after me. And Zora, don't take anything that isn't yours. I will be checking your bags. I walked to the living room where my meager belongings were still piled on the sofa. I grabbed my duffel bag. I went to the coat closet and grabbed my winter coat, the one with the deed inside the lining. I was zipping up the bag when the front door opened again. Courtney breezed in, followed by Andre. They were carrying bags of takeout food and bottles of champagne. Courtney stopped when she saw me standing there with my bag. A slow, malicious smile spread across her face. "Oh, look, Andre," she said loudly. "The help is leaving." Andre laughed, dropping the champagne on the coffee table. "Finally." "Did she sign the papers?" Malik walked in from the kitchen, waving the documents like a trophy. "Signed and sealed, brother. The house is ours. The money is ours. And she is history." Courtney clapped her hands together. "Oh, this is perfect. We can finally breathe in here without all that negative energy." She walked up to me, standing just a little too close, invading my personal space. "Where are you going, Zora?" she asked, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Do you have anywhere to go? Or are you going to sleep in your car?" I looked her in the eye. "I am going to be just fine, Courtney." She reached out and flicked the collar of my coat. "Well, try not to starve. I hear the homeless shelters fill up fast this time of year." I pulled away from her. I picked up my bag. "I have one last load of laundry to get," I said. I walked past them toward the laundry room. They ignored me, already tearing into the takeout bags and popping the champagne cork. I heard the pop and the fizz as I entered the small mudroom. "To the sale," Malik toasted. "To 1.5 million. To us," Courtney cheered. I closed the laundry room door softly. My heart was hammering. This was the dangerous part. I pulled the dryer away from the wall. I opened the vent. I pulled out the metal box. It was heavy and awkward. There was no way I could carry it out the front door past them. I looked at the back door, the one that led to the garage. It was right there. I shoved the box into my duffel bag. It barely fit. I had to leave my shoes and my hairdryer behind to make room. I zipped the bag shut. It bulged unnaturally. I pushed the dryer back into place. I took a deep breath. I walked out of the laundry room and into the garage. "Hey, Zora," Malik shouted from the living room. I froze. "Leave the garage door opener," he yelled. "You do not need access to my property anymore." I took the remote from the visor of the car and placed it on the workbench. "I promise," I whispered. "I never want to come back here again." I threw my bag into the trunk of the Honda. The suspension sagged slightly under the weight of the metal box. I got into the driver's seat. The car smelled like old fast food and neglect. It was the car Malik used when he didn't want to put miles on his leased luxury sedans. It had 200,000 miles on it. I put the key in the ignition. It sputtered, then roared to life. I backed out of the garage. Through the large bay window of the living room, I could see them. Malik was pouring champagne. Courtney was laughing, her head thrown back. Andre was high-fiving his brother. They looked like a picture of success. They looked like winners. They had no idea that the woman backing the dented Honda out of their driveway was driving away with the only thing of value in that entire zip code. I shifted the car into drive. I did not look back. I drove down the long, winding driveway past the manicured lawns of the neighbors who had judged me at the funeral. I drove past the gate. When I hit the main road, I let out a scream. It started deep in my belly and tore through my throat. It was not a scream of pain. It was a scream of release. I drove for 10 miles until I found a gas station. I pulled over to the side near the air pump where it was dark. I needed to check. I needed to make sure it was real one more time. I opened the trunk. I unzipped the bag. I opened the metal box. The ledger was there. The affidavit was there. The key to the safety deposit box was there. I pulled out the affidavit and looked at the signature again. Pearl Brooks. I looked at my phone. It was buzzing. A notification from my bank. Automatic deposit payroll. $1,200. My final paycheck from the restaurant I had quit to take care of Ms. Pearl. I had $1,200. A tank of gas. a rusted metal box, and a car that needed an oil change, and I owned 51% of a company that generated $10 million in revenue last year. I picked up the phone. I dialed the number on Mr. Sterling's business card. It rang 3 times. "Hello," a deep voice answered. "This is Sterling." "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice steady. "This is Zora Brooks." There was a pause on the other end. "Mrs. Brooks, I have been waiting for your call. Did you find it?" I looked at the box. "Yes," I said. "I found the pickles." "Good," Mr. Sterling said. "I am at my office. I do not care what time it is. Come straight here. Do not stop. Do not pass go. Do you understand? I understand. And Mrs. Brooks?" "Yes. Did you sign the divorce papers?" "I signed them," I said. "He thinks I left with nothing." Mr. Sterling chuckled. It was a dry, satisfied sound. "Excellent. Then, let us begin the hostile takeover." I hung up the phone. I merged back onto the highway heading toward downtown Atlanta, toward the gleaming skyscrapers where Mr. Sterling's office waited. As I drove, I passed a billboard. It was an advertisement for Southern Soul Pickles. It showed a jar of the famous spicy garlic blend. The slogan read, "Taste the tradition." I smiled. Malik had sold the house for $1.5 million. He was going to spend that money before the closing documents were even dry. He was going to buy cars he didn't need and impress women who didn't love him. But in 30 days, when the title search came back and the bank realized that the seller, Ms. Pearl Brooks, had transferred the deed 3 months prior to her death, and when the board of directors of Southern Soul Enterprises received the notification that the new majority shareholder was calling an emergency meeting, Malik was going to realize that the Honda Civic he gave me was the most expensive car he ever bought. I turned up the radio. I rolled down the windows. The cold night air rushed in, washing away the smell of the funeral home and the bleach. The 24-hour deadline was up. Malik wanted me gone. I was gone. But I was coming back. And I was bringing hell with me. The silence in my new apartment was different from the silence in the house I had shared with Malik. That house had been silent because it was empty of love, filled only with the echoes of neglect and the rattling breathing of a dying woman. The silence here on the 25th floor of a high-rise in Midtown Atlanta was the silence of power. It was the quiet hum of a sub-zero refrigerator, the soft rustle of expensive curtains moving in the air conditioning, and the muffled sound of the city moving far below me. Malik and Courtney thought I was destitute. They thought I was sleeping in the back seat of that dented Honda Civic, eating ramen noodles and crying over my lost marriage. They had laughed as I drove away, convinced that without Malik's protection, I would wither and die. They forgot who I was before I met Malik. I was an executive sous chef at one of the top restaurants in the city. I was a woman who knew how to budget, how to save, and how to hide money for a rainy day. For 5 years, every time Malik bought a new suit or upgraded his lease, I had put 20% of my paycheck into a high-yield savings account that he did not know existed. I called it my freedom fund. I never touched it, not even when things got bad with Ms. Pearl, because I knew that one day I might need to make a quick exit. That day had come. I took a sip of coffee from a mug that did not belong to a set Miss Pearl had received as a wedding gift. It was my mug in my kitchen in my life. I looked at the clock. It was 9 in the morning. The banks were open. I went to the bedroom and dressed. I did not put on the funeral dress. I put on a tailored navy suit I had bought years ago for a job interview. I pulled my hair back into a tight bun. I looked in the mirror. The tired nurse was gone. The grieving daughter-in-law was gone. The woman staring back at me looked like a CEO. I grabbed my purse. Inside, tucked into a velvet pouch, was the silver key I had found in the pickle jar. I drove the Honda to the First National Bank in Buckhead. I parked around the corner so the valet wouldn't judge the dent in the bumper. I walked into the lobby with my head high. The floors were marble. The air smelled of old money and security. "I need to access a safety deposit box," I told the bank manager. He looked at me over his spectacles. "Do you have the key, ma'am?" I placed the silver key on his mahogany desk. He picked it up, inspected the number stamped on the side, and his demeanor changed instantly. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Box 404. Of course. Please follow me, Mrs. Brooks." He led me through the heavy steel gate, down a flight of stairs, and into the vault. The walls were lined with thousands of metal drawers. It felt like a library of secrets. He stopped in front of a box at eye level. He inserted his master key. I inserted the silver key. They turned in unison. The lock clicked. "I will give you some privacy," the manager said, bowing slightly before backing out of the room. I pulled the long metal box out of the wall. It was heavy. I carried it to the private viewing table in the center of the room. My hands were steady now. The fear I had felt in the kitchen the night of the storm was gone, replaced by a cold determination. I lifted the lid. There was no dust here. Everything was pristine. On top lay a stack of certificates. I picked them up. The paper was thick, bond-textured, and expensive. Southern Soul Enterprises. I started counting. 10,000 shares. 20,000. 50,000. I did the math in my head based on the valuation I had looked up on my phone the night before. Southern Soul was a private company, but its estimated value was in the hundreds of millions. Ms. Pearl held 51%. I was holding paper worth approximately $52 million. 52 million. It was a number so large it felt abstract. It was the kind of money that bought politicians. It was the kind of money that built wings on hospitals. It was the kind of money that could crush a man like Malik like a bug. Beneath the stock certificates was a thick envelope sealed with red wax. On the front, in Ms. Pearl's shaky handwriting, were the words, "The Last Will and Testament of Pearl Brooks." I broke the seal. I pulled out the document. It was not the standard will filled with legal jargon. It was a personal letter, legally binding but written from the heart. "To my lawyers and my children, if you are reading this, I am gone. I have lived a long life, and I have built a great thing from nothing. My pickles are on tables across America. My legacy is secure, but my greatest worry was never the business. It was my family. I have watched my sons Malik and Andre grow into men who love the harvest but hate the planting. They love the shade of the tree, but they will not water the roots. They look at me and see a checkbook. They look at my house and see real estate. I cannot leave my life's work to men who will strip it for parts." I paused, wiping a tear that had fallen onto the table. She had known. She had seen right through Malik's charm and Andre's greed. I continued reading. "Therefore, I have created a test, a simple test of character. I am leaving 100% of my assets, including my majority stake in Southern Soul Enterprises and all real estate holdings, to the person who can make my soup correctly." I blinked. Soup. I read on. "When I became sick, I lost my appetite. The chemo took my taste buds. The only thing I could stomach was my grandmother's bone broth. It takes 48 hours to make. It requires patience. It requires skimming the fat every hour. It requires love." Malik brought me takeout from expensive restaurants. He did not understand that I could not swallow it. Andre brought me flowers, but never a glass of water. But there was one person who stood over the stove for 2 days straight, watching the pot just to make sure I could eat. One person who understood that care is not about spending money, it is about spending time. The recipe for the soup is not written down. It is in the heart. If you are holding this will, it is because you passed the test. You fed me when I was hungry. You comforted me when I was in pain. To Zora Brooks, I leave everything. To my sons, I leave my forgiveness, and the hope that they will learn to build their own lives instead of waiting for mine to end. Signed, Pearl Brooks. I lowered the paper. The silence of the vault seemed to vibrate around me. The soup. I remembered those nights, the smell of roasting bones, the steam rising in the kitchen at 3 in the morning. Malik had yelled at me for making the house smell like a cafeteria. He had told me I was wasting my time, that his mother didn't need peasant food. But Ms. Pearl had sipped that broth with tears in her eyes. She had told me it tasted like home. That was the test. It wasn't about the pickles, it wasn't about the money. It was about who was willing to do the unglamorous hard work of loving someone. I placed the will back in the envelope. I placed the stock certificates back in the box. I had everything I needed. I had the legal right to the company. I had the legal right to the house Malik had just sold. I had the power to undo everything he had done. I closed the box and locked it. I walked out of the bank and into the bright Atlanta sunshine. The city looked different to me now. It didn't look like a place of struggle. It looked like a chessboard. And I was the queen. My phone rang as I got back into the car. It was an unknown number. I answered. Hello? Mrs. Brooks. The voice was deep gravelly and familiar. It was Mr. Sterling. Mr. Sterling, I said. I just left the bank. I know, he said. I received a notification the moment you accessed the box. Ms. Pearl set up a silent alarm to alert me. He paused and I could hear the sound of papers shuffling in the background. Did you read the will? He asked. I did. The soup clause. Mr. Sterling let out a short bark of laughter. Classic Pearl. She always said the stomach is the way to the truth. He cleared his throat, his tone turning serious. Zora, I have drafted the paperwork. I have the injunctions ready to file. I have the board of directors on standby for an emergency call. He waited, letting the weight of his words sink in. We have a narrow window. Malik has filed the deed of sale for the house. The closing is scheduled for 29 days from now. The developer has already applied for demolition permits. If we wait, he might destroy the physical evidence of your residency. I gripped the steering wheel. He wants to tear it down. He wants to erase you, Mr. Sterling said. But we can stop him. We can freeze his assets. We can void the sale. We can expose him for fraud. I looked at the dented dashboard of my Honda. I thought about Malik's smirk when he tossed me these keys. I thought about Courtney flicking the collar of my coat. Do it, I said. Mr. Sterling hesitated. Zora, this is the nuclear option. Once we file this, there is no going back. Malik will be ruined. He will face criminal charges for selling property he did not own. He will be publicly humiliated. The family will be destroyed. I closed my eyes. I saw Ms. Pearl's face in the candlelight. I saw her writing her name with her last ounce of strength. The family was destroyed the moment they left her to die alone. I said, my voice cold and hard. Mr. Sterling hummed in agreement. Very well. I am filing the papers with the Superior Court of Fulton County within the hour. By dinner time, Malik's bank accounts will be frozen. By tomorrow morning, the locks on the corporate offices will be changed. He paused one last time. It is time to activate the bomb, Mrs. Brooks. Enjoy the fireworks. The line went dead. I put the phone down. I started the car. I didn't go back to my apartment. I drove to the nearest high-end grocery store. I walked down the aisle until I found the pickle section. There they were, rows and rows of Southern Soul pickles, the spicy garlic, the dill, the bread and butter. I picked up a jar. I looked at the silhouette of the woman on the label. I bought every single jar on the shelf. I drove to my apartment and lined them up on my granite countertop. They stood like soldiers. My army. Tonight, Malik would be celebrating with Andre and Courtney. They would be drinking expensive champagne toasting to their theft. They would be laughing about how easy it was to get rid of Zora. They didn't know that the soup was already boiling, and they were the ingredients. I walked to the window and looked out at the skyline. Somewhere out there, Malik was probably looking at a new Porsche. Go ahead, Malik, I whispered. Buy it. Put it on the card. Because tomorrow that card is going to be declined, and the only thing you are going to be eating is humble pie. I went into the kitchen and started to cook. I didn't make a fancy meal. I made soup, bone broth. I let it simmer, filling my new expensive apartment with the smell of peasantry and love. I poured a bowl and sat down to eat. It tasted like victory. The morning of the closing was bright and clear, the kind of day that felt tailor-made for winners. For Malik Brooks and his entourage, it was the coronation day they had been waiting for. They gathered at the breakfast table of the house they believed was theirs, eating croissants and drinking mimosas. The mood was electric. The air was thick with the smell of expensive cologne and entitlement. Malik was wearing a new suit. It was a custom Italian cut of midnight blue fabric that shimmered slightly under the kitchen lights. He adjusted his silk tie in the reflection of the same microwave where Zora used to heat up her lunch. He grinned at himself. He looked like a millionaire because in his mind he already was one. Andre was sitting at the table scrolling through his phone. He showed the screen to Courtney. "Look at this baby," he said, his voice trembling with excitement. "The realtor just sent the video tour. 7 bedrooms. Theater room. Infinity pool. It is in Buckhead right next to the governor's mansion. Once we get the check today, I am wiring the deposit." Courtney laughed, clapping her manicured hands. She was wearing a white dress that looked like something a bride would wear to a rehearsal dinner. She wanted to look pure, innocent, and wealthy. "It is perfect, Andre," she cooed. "Finally, we will be living in a house that reflects our status. No more dusty old furniture. No more smell of pickles and old people." Malik turned from his reflection. "Don't forget the cars," he said, checking his Rolex. "The dealership called. They are prepping the Porsche. I told them I would be there by 4 with the cashier's check." He walked over to the counter where the keys to the house lay. He picked them up and tossed them in the air, catching them with a confident snap. $1.5 million, he said, savoring the words. And all it took was getting rid of the dead weight. He meant me. I was the dead weight. They left the house in a convoy. Malik drove the rental luxury sedan with Courtney in the passenger seat, while Andre followed in his own car. They drove toward downtown Atlanta, toward the high-rise office of the closing attorney. They felt invincible. They had won. The inconvenient wife was gone. The stubborn mother was dead. The path was clear. They arrived at the law firm of Jenkins and Associates at 10 o'clock sharp. The office was intimidating. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. The conference room table was made of glass and chrome. Mr. Jenkins, the closing attorney, was already there. Sitting opposite him was the buyer, Mr. Henderson, a developer who looked like a shark in a gray suit. He was tapping his pen on the table, impatient to get the deal done. He wanted to tear the house down before the end of the month. Malik walked in, extending his hand with the confidence of a king. "Gentlemen," Malik boomed. "Sorry to keep you waiting. Traffic in this city is a nightmare when you are this successful." Mr. Henderson did not smile. He just nodded. "Let us get this over with, Mr. Brooks. I have a demolition crew on standby." Malik sat down. Courtney sat next to him, placing her designer handbag on the table so the logo was visible. Andre took the seat on the other side. Mr. Jenkins cleared his throat. He looked uncomfortable. He was shuffling papers, looking for something he could not find. "Is there a problem?" Malik asked, leaning back in his chair. "Do you need a pen?" Mr. Jenkins looked up. He adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Brooks, before we proceed with the signatures, there has been a development." "A development?" Malik repeated, his smile faltering slightly. "What kind of development?" "The price is locked. 1.5, no negotiations." Mr. Henderson slammed his hand on the table. "It is not about the price, Brooks. It is about the title." Malik looked at the developer, then back at the attorney. "The title. What about the title? It is clean. My mother owned it free and clear. I am her sole heir along with my brother. We have the death certificate. We have the probate filing." Mr. Jenkins sighed. He pulled a file from his briefcase. It was a red file, the color of warning. "We ran the final title search this morning, Mr. Brooks. Standard procedure right before closing. Usually, it is just a formality to check for liens or unpaid taxes." And Malik urged. "And we found a cloud on the title," Mr. Jenkins said. "A very large, distinct storm cloud." Malik laughed nervously. "A cloud. What does that mean? Did Mama forget to pay a water bill? Just deduct it from the sale price. We are talking about pocket change, right?" Mr. Jenkins shook his head slowly. No, Mr. Brooks, this is not a utility bill. This is a transfer of ownership. The room went deadly silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Transfer of ownership, Malik whispered. That is impossible. Mama didn't sell the house. She was dying. She was bedridden. Mr. Jenkins opened the red file. He pulled out a document. It was a copy of the notarized affidavit I had hidden in the metal box. The one Ms. Pearl had signed 3 months ago. According to the Fulton County Deed Registry, Mr. Jenkins read, his voice monotone and professional. The property located at 124 Oak Street was transferred via a quitclaim deed 90 days ago. The transfer was legally recorded and notarized. Courtney gasped. Transferred? To whom? Who did she give it to? Malik stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is a mistake, he shouted. It has to be a mistake. Or a fraud. My mother was on heavy medication. Someone must have tricked her. Who is the grantee? Who is trying to steal my house? Mr. Jenkins looked at the paper. He looked up at Malik. His eyes were full of pity. The grantee is Zora Brooks. The name hung in the air like a gunshot. Malik froze. His mouth opened but no sound came out. Andre jumped up, knocking over his water glass. Zora, that is impossible. She is a broke chef. She doesn't have 2 nickels to rub together. Mr. Jenkins continued reading, ignoring the outburst. The deed stipulates that Pearl Brooks transferred full ownership of the property to Zora Brooks in exchange for caretaking services rendered. The consideration listed is $1 and other valuable love and affection. $1, Malik choked out. $1. Mr. Henderson, the developer, stood up. He buttoned his jacket. Well, that is it, he said coldly. I do not deal with disputed titles. The deal is off. Wait, Malik pleaded, reaching out to grab the developer's arm. Wait, Mr. Henderson, we can fix this. It is clearly a forgery. That woman is a liar. She is my ex-wife. She is trying to sabotage me. Give me a day. I will get a lawyer. I will get it overturned. Mr. Henderson shook him off. You do not own the house, Mr. Brooks. You cannot sell what you do not own. You have wasted my time. And time is money. He turned to his assistant. Cancel the wire transfer. And call the demolition crew. Tell them the job is canceled. Mr. Henderson walked out of the room, leaving the heavy glass door swinging behind him. Malik sank back into his chair. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. $1.5 million. Gone, just like that. But the nightmare was not over. Mr. Jenkins cleared his throat again. There is one more thing, Mr. Brooks. Malik looked up, his eyes red with rage and unshed tears. What? What else could there possibly be? Since the title is not in your name, Mr. Jenkins said, sliding a piece of paper across the table, you are technically trespassing on the property. Mrs. Zora Brooks' attorney, a Mr. Sterling, contacted my office 10 minutes ago. Sterling, Malik whispered. The name sounded familiar. He has filed an immediate injunction, Mr. Jenkins said. You are to vacate the premises immediately. You are not to remove any items from the home, as they are now considered the property of the new owner. And what? Courtney shrieked, her composure completely gone. And there is the matter of the deposits, Mr. Jenkins said. Malik's face went pale. The deposits. You wrote checks yesterday, Mr. Jenkins reminded him. Earnest money for the new house. The down payment for the Porsche. The catering deposit for your celebration party. You wrote those checks against the expected proceeds of this sale. Malik stared at his hands. Since the funds from this sale will not be deposited into your account, Mr. Jenkins said, those checks are going to bounce. Bouncing checks over $10,000 is a felony in this state, Andre whispered. His face was gray. Malik did not speak. He could not breathe. He thought about the Porsche dealership. He thought about the realtor. He thought about the fact that he had $0 in his actual bank account because he had spent his last dime on the funeral suit and the first-class ticket from Miami. He was not just broke. He was in debt. And he was homeless. Courtney turned on him. Her mask of the supportive wife crumbled instantly. You told me it was a done deal, she screamed. You told me to order the furniture. You told me to quit my job at the pharmacy because we were going to be rich. You idiot. You incompetent, arrogant idiot. Shut up, Courtney Malik snapped. Don't you tell me to shut up, she yelled, grabbing her handbag. I am not going down with you. I am not going to jail for check fraud. She stormed out of the conference room, her heels clicking angrily on the marble. Andre looked at his brother. Malik, man, what do we do? I put 5 grand down on that trip to Cabo. They are going to come for me. Malik did not answer. He was staring at the red file on the table. Zora. The name tasted like poison in his mouth. She had played him. She had sat there at the funeral in her cheap dress and let him humiliate her. She had signed the divorce papers with that calm little smile. She had taken the old Honda and driven away. And all the while she had the deed in her pocket. She knew. She knew the whole time. He remembered her words before she left. I promise I never want to come back here again. She didn't want to come back as a guest. She wanted to come back as the landlord. A rage unlike anything he had ever felt began to boil in his chest. It started in his stomach and rose up like bile. She stole it, he hissed. She stole my inheritance. She manipulated a dying woman. He stood up so fast his chair flipped over backward and crashed onto the floor. Zora, he screamed. The sound echoed off the glass walls. The receptionist outside looked in with wide eyes. Zora. He grabbed the glass of water in front of him and threw it against the wall. It shattered, sending water and shards of glass everywhere. I will kill her, he roared. I will kill her. Mr. Jenkins stood up, pressing a button on his desk. Security, please come to conference room B immediately. Malik was panting, his chest heaving. He looked at the shattered glass. He realized that his life was just like that glass. Broken, irreparable. And it was all because of the quiet woman who made soup. He had underestimated her. He had thought she was a sheep. He forgot that even a sheep will bite if you back it into a corner. But Zora wasn't a sheep. She was a wolf. And she had just gone for the jugular. Come on, Andre Malik said, straightening his jacket, though his hands were shaking uncontrollably. We are leaving. Where are we going? Andre asked, his voice small. We can't go to the new house. We can't go to the old house. We are going to find her, Malik snarled. And I am going to make her wish she had stayed in the kitchen. They walked out of the office past the security guards who were rushing down the hall. They took the elevator down to the parking garage. Malik got into his rental car. He slammed the door. He gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He pulled out his phone. He dialed her number. It went straight to voicemail. You have reached Zora Brooks. I am currently busy enjoying my life. Please leave a message. Malik screamed again, hitting the dashboard with his fist. He didn't know that the war was just beginning. He didn't know about the stock certificates. He didn't know about the $50 million. He thought he had lost a house. He was about to lose everything else. They say that a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes. I learned the hard way that when the lie is told by a beautiful crying woman on morning television, the truth does not just lag behind, it gets run over by a truck. The counterattack began 48 hours after the closing fell through. I was in my new apartment drinking tea and watching the sunrise when the buzzer rang. It was not a guest. It was a process server. A man with a thick neck and an apologetic expression handed me a stack of documents thick enough to be a novel. You have been served, ma'am, he mumbled before retreating to the elevator. I took the papers to the kitchen island. I did not need to be a lawyer to understand the weight of what I was holding. The cover page bore the seal of the Superior Court of Fulton County. The plaintiff was Malik Brooks. The defendant was Zora Brooks. The charges were breathtaking in their cruelty. Count 1. Fraud and embezzlement, accusing me of manipulating a mentally incapacitated woman into signing over her assets. Count 2. Intentional infliction of emotional distress, accusing me of barring the family from seeing their dying matriarch, causing them irreparable psychological harm. but it was count 3 that made my blood run cold. Elder abuse and neglect by deprivation of sustenance. I had to read it 3 times. Malik was accusing me of starving Ms. Pearl. He was claiming that I withheld food and water to weaken her resolve and force her to sign the deed. He was claiming that the woman I had hand-fed with a spoon for months, the woman I had learned to make bone broth for, was a victim of my torture. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to grip the countertop. I thought about the nights I sat up massaging her feet. I thought about the days I went hungry so I could afford her organic vegetables. Malik had hired the most vicious law firm in Atlanta, Vane and Partners. They were known as the Pit Bulls of Buckhead. They did not just win cases, they destroyed reputations. Malik must have promised them a massive contingency fee or used the last of his credit to retain them. He was going all in. He was not just trying to get the house back. He was trying to put me in prison. My phone started buzzing. Then it started ringing. Then the text messages started flooding in. Monster! I hope you rot in jail. How could you do that to an old lady? I didn't understand what was happening. How did people know? The lawsuit had just been served. Then I got a text from my sister in Savannah. Turn on the TV. Channel 5. Now. I grabbed the remote. I turned on the local morning news program, Atlanta Awake. And there sat Courtney. She was sitting on a beige sofa across from the sympathetic host. She was not wearing her usual designer clothes. She was wearing a soft pastel cardigan and a modest skirt. She wore no jewelry. Her hair was pulled back loosely. She looked like a grieving angel. Next to her sat Malik. He was wearing a dark suit, looking down at his hands, his posture slumped in defeated sorrow. The banner at the bottom of the screen read, "Exclusive Family Claims Caretaker, Swindled Dying Grandmother." I turned up the volume. My hands were shaking. It was a nightmare, Courtney was saying, her voice trembling. We tried to visit. We went there every day, but that woman, she would not let us in. She changed the locks. She told us Mama Pearl was sleeping or that she was contagious. The host leaned in, her face full of concern. So you are saying she isolated the victim? Completely? Courtney sobbed, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. We didn't know what was happening behind those closed doors. We thought she was taking care of her. We sent money, thousands of dollars a month for food and medicine. I screamed at the TV. You sent $500 6 months ago, but the audience couldn't hear me. They could only hear Courtney. When we finally got into the house after she passed, Courtney continued, her voice dropping to a horrified whisper. We found... Oh God, Malik, I can't say it. Malik looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. He looked directly into the camera. We found the refrigerator empty, he said, his voice thick with emotion. There was no food, just some old condiments. My mother, the coroner said she was severely malnourished. She weighed nothing. He paused, letting the lie sink in. That woman starved my mother to death, he said. She held a plate of food in front of a dying woman and said, "Sign the house over to me and I will feed you." That is the only explanation. My mother loved us. She would never have disinherited us. She was coerced through torture. The host looked horrified. She turned to the camera. These are shocking allegations. A family destroyed by the very person hired to protect them. We reached out to Zora Brooks for comment, but she could not be reached. That was a lie. They had never called me. Malik continued, gaining momentum. We are not even worried about the money. We just want justice for Mama Pearl. We want the person who hurt her to pay. We are asking anyone who knows anything to come forward. We need the community's support to fight this evil. The segment ended with a montage of photos. Photos of Ms. Pearl from 10 years ago looking happy and healthy next to a smiling Malik. And then a photo of me taken from my Facebook profile, a picture where I was unsmiling and looking severe in my chef's uniform holding a knife. They had edited the narrative perfectly. The loving son, the innocent daughter-in-law, and the butcher chef who starved an old lady for real estate. I turned off the TV. The silence in the room was deafening. My phone was still buzzing. I picked it up. My social media notifications were exploding, thousands of comments. People were digging up my old workplace, leaving one-star reviews saying I poisoned food. People were finding my address. We know where you live. Justice for Pearl. Baby killer. Granny starver. I felt like the walls were closing in. I had the truth. I had the documents. But in the court of public opinion, I was already convicted. They had weaponized the one thing I valued most, my integrity as a caregiver. I walked to the window. Down on the street 25 stories below, I could see a news van pulling up. They had found me. Panic started to rise in my chest. A cold, suffocating grip. Maybe I should run. Maybe I should just give them the house back. It wasn't worth this. It wasn't worth being the most hated woman in Atlanta. I backed away from the window. I went to the kitchen. I saw the jar of Southern Soul pickles on the counter. I remembered Miss Pearl's voice. The vultures are circling. Prepare your weapon. She knew. She knew they would do this. She knew they would lie. That was why she made me install the camera. That was why she made sure I kept the receipts. I took a deep breath. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. You are not a victim, I told my reflection. You are the CEO. I walked back to the living room and picked up my phone. I dialed Mr. Sterling. He answered on the first ring. I saw the broadcast, he said. His voice was calm, deep, and reassuring. They are lying, I said. Every word. I know Zora. They are accusing me of starvation, Mr. Sterling. They are saying I tortured her. This is their strategy, he said. It is called the scorched earth policy. They know they cannot win on the facts, so they are trying to destroy your credibility before we even get to court. They want you to settle. They want you to panic and offer to give the house back just to make the harassment stop. He paused. Are you panicking, Zora? I looked at the TV screen where the image of Malik's fake tears was burned into my mind. I thought about the box in the laundry vent. I thought about the hidden camera footage, the video of Malik cursing his mother, the video of Courtney throwing away the food. I looked at the stack of lawsuit papers. No, I said. I am not panicking. Good, Mr. Sterling said. I have already drafted a defamation suit, and I have the footage ready to submit into evidence. We can release it to the press today. We can prove they are liars within the hour. I hesitated. If we release it now, I said slowly, the public will turn on them. Yes, Mr. Sterling said. It would be a decisive blow. But if we release it now, I continued thinking like a chess player, thinking like Ms. Pearl Malik, and Courtney will just claim it was a misunderstanding. They will spin it. They will say they were emotional. I looked at the lawsuit again. I looked at the sworn affidavits signed by Malik and Courtney under penalty of perjury. Mr. Sterling, I said, if they lie in court, if they get on the stand and repeat these lies under oath, that is a crime, right? That is perjury, Mr. Sterling said. It is a felony. It carries prison time. And if they solicit donations from the public based on these lies, that is fraud, right? Wire fraud, Mr. Sterling confirmed. Also a felony. I smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a woman who was watching a fly land on a trap. Do not release the video, I said. Mr. Sterling was silent for a moment. Zora, are you sure? The harassment will get worse. They will drag your name through the mud for weeks. Let them, I said. Let them go on every talk show. Let them set up a GoFundMe page. Let them file every motion and swear every oath. I want them to dig the hole so deep that they can never climb out. I walked over to the window and looked down at the news van. They want a show, I said. Let us give them a show. Let them think they are winning. Let them think I am hiding in here terrified. But Zora, Mr. Sterling warned, this requires nerves of steel. Can you handle being the villain for a little while longer? I touched the necklace I was wearing. It was a cheap locket Miss Pearl had given me years ago. I handled watching my husband leave me for 6 months, I said. I handled watching his mother die in my arms. I can handle a few mean tweets. Very well, Mr. Sterling said. I will file our answer to the complaint, but I will keep the evidence sealed. We will let them present their entire case. We will let them hang themselves. And Mr. Sterling, I added. Yes. Make sure the court date is set as soon as possible. I do not want to keep my company waiting. I hung up the phone. I walked over to the television and pulled the plug from the wall. I did not need to watch their performance anymore. I knew how it ended. I went to the kitchen and started chopping vegetables. The rhythmic sound of the knife hitting the cutting board calmed me. Malik thought he was the director of this play. He thought he was the star. He didn't realize that he was just the clown in the tragedy of his own making. I chopped the carrots. I chopped the celery. Let them act, I whispered to the empty room. Let them cry their fake tears. Because when the curtain falls on this charade, I will be the only one left standing, and I will be standing on a pile of $50 million. The Superior Court of Fulton County was built to intimidate. The ceilings were high enough to hold the weight of God, and the walls were lined with portraits of old white judges who looked like they had never smiled a day in their lives. But the atmosphere inside courtroom 4B was not solemn. It was electric. It felt less like a legal proceeding and more like a gladiator match where the lions were already circling, and I was the meat. Every wooden bench was packed. The gallery was overflowing with reporters, curious neighbors, and people who had just seen my face on the news and wanted to witness the downfall of the woman they called the Granny Starver. When I walked down the center aisle flanked by Mr. Sterling and two court officers, the sound was like a physical wave. A low rumble of whispers, hisses, and sucked teeth. I kept my eyes fixed on the seal of the state of Georgia hanging above the judge's bench, but I could feel their hatred on my skin. It felt like walking through a swarm of bees. Malik was already seated at the plaintiff's table. He looked devastatingly handsome in a charcoal suit that fit him like a second skin. He had his head bowed, his hands clasped in front of him as if he were praying. To the casual observer, he looked like a broken man seeking justice for his beloved mother. To me, he looked like a viper coiled and ready to strike. Next to him sat his lawyer, Mr. Vane, a man with teeth so white they looked fake and a reputation for destroying lives for sport. Courtney and Andre sat in the front row directly behind Malik. Courtney was dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue holding the hand of her husband, who looked nervous but determined. They were a tableau of family grief. A perfect picture designed to make me look like the monster who had torn them apart. All rise, the bailiff bellowed. Judge Holloway swept into the room. He was a formidable man with gray hair and a face carved from granite. He did not look happy to be there. He looked at the packed courtroom with disdain, and then his eyes landed on me. There was no neutrality in his gaze. There was cold, hard judgment. I felt a shiver run down my spine. In a bench trial, the judge is the jury. If he already hated me, I was dead before I even opened my mouth. Mr. Vane stood up to deliver his opening statement. He did not use notes. He walked back and forth in front of the judge, his voice rising and falling like a preacher on Sunday. "Your Honor," he began, pointing a finger at me, "we are here today to right a terrible wrong. We are here because a predator infiltrated the home of a vulnerable dying woman. We are here because Zora Brooks, a woman with no medical training and a history of financial instability, used starvation and isolation to torture Pearl Brooks into signing away her legacy." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "We will prove that the deed transfer was not an act of generosity, but an act of desperation. A dying woman trading her house for a glass of water. And we will prove that, at the time of the signature, Pearl Brooks lacked the mental capacity to enter into any legal contract." I gripped the edge of the defense table. My knuckles turned white. Mr. Sterling placed his heavy hand over mine. His skin was dry and papery like old parchment, but his grip was iron. "Steady," he whispered without looking at me. "Let the dog bark." Mr. Vane called his first witness. "I call Courtney Brooks to the stand." Courtney walked to the witness box. She took the oath, her voice trembling just enough to sound fragile. She sat down, smoothing her skirt, looking at the judge with wide, trusting eyes. "Mrs. Brooks, Mr. Vane, said his voice gentle. Please tell the court your profession. I am a licensed pharmacist, Courtney said. I have been practicing for 8 years. I specialize in geriatric pharmacology. And in your professional opinion, how was Pearl Brooks's health in the months leading up to her death? Courtney took a deep breath. She looked at me, then looked away, as if the sight of me was too painful to bear. She was deteriorating rapidly. The cancer had metastasized to her brain. It caused significant cognitive decline. By the end, she did not know what year it was. She often confused Malik with her late husband. She was paranoid. She was hallucinating. Liar, I screamed inside my head. She was sharp as a tack until the last breath. She knew exactly who you were, Courtney. She called you a vulture. Mr. Vane nodded sympathetically. And, regarding her medication, did you manage it? I tried to, Courtney sobbed. I tried to set up a schedule. But Zora, the defendant, she locked the medication away. She said she knew better. But when I checked the bottles after Pearl passed, I found discrepancies. Discrepancies? Mr. Vane asked. Yes. Based on the pill count, it appeared Pearl was being underdosed on her pain medication, but overdosed on sedatives. A gasp went through the gallery. Sedatives, Mr. Vane repeated. Why would someone give a dying woman sedatives? To keep her compliant, Courtney whispered. To make her docile. To make her sign papers she did not understand. It was a master class in fiction. She was using her credentials to weave a scientific lie. She was painting a picture of chemical restraint. And Mrs. Brooks, Mr. Vane said, handing her a thick blue folder. Do you recognize these documents? Yes, Courtney said. These are Pearl's medical records from her primary care physician. I retrieved them from the house after she passed. Please read the highlighted section from the visit dated 2 weeks before the alleged deed transfer. Courtney adjusted her glasses. She looked at the paper. Patient exhibits signs of advanced vascular dementia, disorientation to time and place, unable to manage financial affairs. Recommendation is immediate power of attorney transfer to next of kin. My heart stopped. I knew that doctor, Dr. Evans. He had seen Miss Pearl, but he had never diagnosed her with dementia. He had said she was remarkably lucid. Where did that paper come from? I whispered to Mr. Sterling. That is not real. Mr. Sterling did not answer. He was watching Courtney intently, his eyes narrowed behind his spectacles. Mr. Vane took the file and presented it to the judge. Your Honor, he said. Honor. We submit into evidence Exhibit A, certified medical records stating that Pearl Brooks was legally incompetent to sign any contract. This renders the deed transfer to Zora Brooks null and void. Judge Holloway took the file. He put on his reading glasses. He flipped through the pages. He frowned. This looks definitive, he muttered. The diagnosis is clear. He looked over his glasses at me. His expression was one of pure disgust. Ms. Brooks, if this woman was incompetent, how do you explain the signature on the deed? Did you guide her hand? Did you force the pen into her fingers? I stood up. Your Honor, that is a lie. That record is a forgery. Courtney made it up. Sit down, Mr. Sterling hissed, pulling me back into my chair. The judge banged his gavel. Counsel, control your client. Another outburst like that, and I will hold her in contempt. I slumped back in my chair. I felt like I was drowning. They had forged medical records. Courtney was a pharmacist. She knew exactly how to format the documents, how to use the medical codes, how to make it look authentic. And because she was the family member who retrieved the records, no one questioned their validity. Mr. Vane looked at the jury box, which was empty since this was a bench trial, and smiled. He had done it. He had planted the seed of doubt so deep it was turning into a tree of conviction. No further questions, Mr. Vane said. He walked back to his table and high-fived Malik under the table. I saw it, the quick slap of victory. Mr. Sterling stood up slowly. He buttoned his jacket. He did not look worried. He did not look angry. He looked bored. He walked to the lectern. He did not look at Courtney. He looked at the judge. Your Honor, Mr. Sterling said, his voice gravelly and deep, filling the room without shouting. The plaintiff has presented a compelling story, a tragedy really, a senile old woman drugged and duped by a wicked nurse. He paused, taking off his glasses and cleaning them with a handkerchief. If I believed their story, I would convict my client myself. It is a horrific tale. Malik smirked. Even my lawyer sounded like he was giving up. However, Mr. Sterling continued, putting his glasses back on. There is one small problem with this narrative. He turned to look at Courtney. Mrs. Brooks, you stated under oath that Pearl Brooks did not know what year it was, that she confused her son with her husband, that she was essentially a vegetable in the weeks leading up to her death. That is correct, Courtney said, lifting her chin. It was heartbreaking to watch. And this diagnosis of vascular dementia, Mr. Sterling said, pointing to the blue file. You are certain of its authenticity? 100%, Courtney said. It is from Dr. Evans' office. Mr. Sterling nodded. He walked back to our table. He picked up his briefcase. It is interesting, Mr. Sterling said, because usually when a patient has advanced dementia, they lose the ability to perform complex tasks. They cannot balance a checkbook. They cannot remember recipes. They certainly cannot engage in long, detailed conversations about the future of a multi-million-dollar corporation. Malik frowned. He leaned forward. Objection. Mr. Vane stood up. Relevance. We are talking about the house deed, not a corporation. It is entirely relevant, Mr. Sterling said. Because the plaintiff claims Ms. Pearl was incompetent. I intend to prove she was the sharpest person in this room. He turned to the judge. Your Honor, the defense would like to call a witness. A special witness. Judge Holloway looked impatient. Mr. Sterling, we are on a tight schedule. Is this witness present? I do not see anyone else on your list. Oh, she is present, Your Honor, Mr. Sterling said. In a manner of speaking. He pulled a small remote control from his pocket. He pointed it at the large television screen mounted on the wall adjacent to the witness box. The defense calls Pearl Brooks to the stand. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Malik stood up. What is this? She is dead. You cannot call a dead woman. Sit down, Mr. Brooks, the judge barked. Mr. Sterling pressed the button. The screen flickered to life. The audio crackled. And then suddenly, there she was. The image was grainy black and white, but crystal clear. It was the kitchen of the house. The timestamp in the corner read, October 14th, 11:42 p.m., 3 days before she died. A gasp went through the room. On the screen, Ms. Pearl was sitting at the kitchen table. She looked frail, yes. Her bones were visible through her skin. But she was sitting upright. She was holding a cup of tea, and sitting across from her was me. I remember this night, I whispered. On the screen, Ms. Pearl looked directly into the camera lens hidden in the spice rack. She lifted a hand and waved. Testing, testing, she said. Her voice was weak, but her diction was perfect. Is this thing on Zora? Yes, Ms. Pearl, I said in the video. The red light is blinking. Good, Ms. Pearl said. She cleared her throat. She looked straight at the camera, which meant she was looking straight at Judge Holloway, straight at Malik, straight at the entire courtroom. My name is Pearl Brooks, she said. Today is October 14th. The year is 2023. The current president is Joe Biden. My address is 124 Oak Street. She paused, taking a sip of tea. I am making this recording because I know my family. I know my son Malik. And I know his wife Courtney. In the courtroom, Courtney went pale. Her hand flew to her mouth. They are greedy, Ms. Pearl said on the screen. And they are lazy. When I die, and I will die soon, they will be angry that I did not leave them the keys to the kingdom. They will say I was crazy. They will say I was senile. They will probably produce some doctor's note saying I lost my mind. Malik slammed his fist on the table. Turn it off! This is inadmissible. Silence, Judge Holloway roared. He was leaning forward, his eyes glued to the screen. Ms. Pearl continued. So let me be clear. I am of sound mind. I am of sound body, except for this cancer eating my pancreas. And I am about to sign a deed transferring my home to Zora Brooks. On the screen, she held up the deed. She held up the pen. Zora did not ask for this, she said. Zora tried to talk me out of it, but Zora is the only one who stayed. Malik went to Miami. I know because I saw the credit card alert on his phone when he left it on the counter. Malik sank into his chair. He looked like he was going to be sick. Courtney came by last week, Ms. Pearl said, her voice hardening. She wore gloves. She threw away my soup. She told Andre that I smelled like rotting meat. Courtney let out a sob. A real one this time. I am not crazy, Ms. Pearl said. I am just disappointed. And to prove that I am competent, I will now recite the closing stock prices for the day from the Wall Street Journal, which I read this morning. She picked up a newspaper. Apple, $170. Tesla, $250. And Southern Soul Enterprises. She smiled a wicked, knowing smile. Is holding steady. She signed the paper on camera. She looked up one last time. So if you are watching this in a courtroom, Judge, please do not let my son steal from me twice. He stole my heart by becoming a disappointment. Do not let him steal my home. The screen went black. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was the kind of silence that follows a bomb blast. Mr. Sterling lowered the remote. He looked at Courtney, who was shaking in the witness box. He looked at Malik, who was staring at the blank screen with a look of pure terror. He turned to the judge. Your Honor, Mr. Sterling said softly, the defense moves to dismiss all charges, and we would like to submit Exhibit B, a motion for perjury against Courtney Brooks for submitting forged medical records. Judge Holloway took off his glasses. He looked at the blue file Courtney had given him. He looked at Courtney. Mrs. Brooks, the judge said, his voice dangerously low. Did you forge this document? Courtney looked at Malik. Help me, she mouthed. Malik looked away. He was already distancing himself. He was already calculating how to throw her under the bus. I... Courtney stammered. Malik told me to. He said we had to. He said it was the only way. Malik jumped up. You lying witch, I never told you to do that. Order, the judge shouted, banging his gavel so hard the handle cracked. Order in this court. But it was too late. The dam had broken. The crowd in the gallery was shouting. The reporters were typing furiously on their phones. Mr. Sterling turned to me and winked. Round one goes to the pickles, he whispered. I looked at Malik. He was screaming at his lawyer. He was screaming at his wife. He was a man watching his world crumble. But I knew this was just the beginning. The house was saved, but I still had $50 million in stock to reveal. And when that hammer dropped, Malik wouldn't just be broke, he would be obliterated. I sat back in my chair. Your move, Malik, I thought. Your move. The screen went black, but the image of Ms. Pearl holding that newspaper was burned into the retinas of everyone in the room. The silence that followed was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a vacuum before a violent implosion. I sat at the defense table, keeping my face impassive, but under the table my hands were gripping the fabric of my skirt so hard my fingers ached. I dared to look at Malik. He was frozen in his chair, his mouth slightly open, his skin taking on a gray, ashy tone that clashed with his expensive suit. Courtney was weeping silently, but these were not the pretty tears of a grieving daughter. They were the ugly, terrified tears of a woman realizing she was cornered. Mr. Sterling walked back to the center of the room. He moved slowly, deliberately. He looked like a predator who had already caught its prey and was just playing with it before the final bite. He stopped in front of the witness box where Courtney was still sitting shivering like a wet leaf. Mrs. Brooks, Mr. Sterling said, his voice dangerously soft. You testified earlier that my client Zora Brooks kept the house in a state of squalor. You mentioned specifically that the kitchen was dirty, that there were stains on the cabinets. Courtney blinked, looking confused by the change of subject. Yes, it was filthy. I tried to clean it, but Zora would not let me. Mr. Sterling nodded. He walked to the evidence table and picked up a small black object. It was no bigger than a quarter. You mentioned a specific black smudge on the spice rack, Mr. Sterling said. You said you tried to wipe it off with your white glove, but it would not come off. You told the police it was black mold. Courtney nodded, her eyes darting around the room. Yes, mold. It is toxic. It proves neglect. Mr. Sterling held up the small black object. This is the mold, Mrs. Brooks. He turned it over in his fingers. It is a wide-angle high-definition camera lens. Courtney gasped. Her hand flew to her throat. Mr. Sterling turned to the judge. Your Honor, Ms. Pearl Brooks was a businesswoman. She built an empire from a kitchen table. She knew that people lie, but inventory does not. When she realized her health was failing and her family was circling, she did what any good CEO would do. She installed a security system. He pointed to the large screen again. We have submitted into evidence Exhibit C, 200 hours of continuous footage from the kitchen of 124 Oak Street, covering the entire 6-month period of Zora Brooks's caretaking. He looked at Malik. The plaintiff claims my client starved the deceased. He claims she was abusive. He claims he was the loving son sending money and support. Mr. Sterling smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile. Let us go to the tape. He pressed the remote. The screen flickered to life again. The timestamp read August 12th, 2 months before Ms. Pearl died. The video showed the kitchen. It was spotless. I was there chopping vegetables. Ms. Pearl was sitting at the table eating a bowl of soup. She was laughing. Zora, honey, she said in the video, her voice clear. This broth is the only thing keeping me alive. You have magic hands. Then the scene cut. The timestamp changed. September 5th. Malik walked into the frame. The courtroom gasped. Malik had sworn under oath he was in Dubai, but there he was in the kitchen in Atlanta, wearing a polo shirt and holding a beer. He was on the phone. He was pacing back and forth, ignoring his mother who was sitting in the corner coughing. Yeah, baby, Malik said into the phone, his voice echoing through the courtroom speakers. I am still stuck here. The old lady is hanging on. She is tough. It is annoying. He took a swig of beer. I know I promised we would go to Cabo, but I can't liquidate the assets until she kicks the bucket. I know. I know. It is taking forever. On the screen, Malik turned and looked at his mother with pure disgust. Why don't you just let go, Mama? He said to her face. You are draining my inheritance. Every day you breathe is another $1,000 I lose. Just die already. Do us all a favor. Ms. Pearl looked down at her hands. She did not speak. In the courtroom, the reaction was visceral. People were shouting. A woman in the back row screamed, "Shame on you!" Judge Holloway looked like he was about to jump over the bench. His face was a mask of fury. Malik covered his face with his hands. He was shaking his head, muttering, "No, no, no," over and over again. Mr. Sterling did not stop. Next clip, he said. The timestamp changed. September 20th. Courtney walked into the kitchen. She was wearing her white gloves. She opened the refrigerator. It was full. There were containers of fresh fruit, organic yogurt, and jars of homemade soup. This is trash, Courtney said to Andre, who was standing behind her. She began taking the food out and throwing it into the garbage can. We need to clear this out, she said. When she dies, I want this kitchen empty so we can stage it for the sale. Zora is wasting money on all this organic crap. She turned to Ms. Pearl, who was watching from her wheelchair. You do not need this, Pearl, Courtney said, speaking to her like she was a child. You are not hungry anyway. Stop making Zora cook. It is selfish. She slammed the fridge door. The video cut again. This time it was the night of the signing. The night Courtney claimed I had forced a senile woman to sign the deed. The video showed Ms. Pearl sitting at the table. I was standing next to her looking worried. Ms. Pearl, I said in the video, you do not have to do this. Malik will be furious. Let him be furious, Miss Pearl said. She picked up the pen. Her hand was shaking, but her eyes were fierce. She looked at the paper. She read it out loud. I, Pearl Brooks, transfer all rights and title. She looked up at me. Zora, listen to me. This is not payment. This is protection. If I leave this house to Malik, he will sell it for parts. He will erase our history. You are the only one who respects the soil. She signed the paper. She pressed down hard on the pen. There, she said, pushing the paper toward me. It is done. Now hide it. Hide it where the peacocks won't look. She laughed a dry, rasping sound. Under the pickles. The video froze on that image. Ms. Pearl smiling amidst her pain, looking triumphant. Mr. Sterling turned off the screen. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning hum. But it was a heavy, dangerous silence. Mr. Sterling turned to the judge. Your Honor, the defense rests. Judge Holloway slowly took off his glasses. He placed them on the bench. He folded his hands. He looked at Mr. Vane Malik's high-priced lawyer. Counsel, the judge said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. Do you have any cross-examination? Mr. Vane stood up. He looked at Malik. He looked at the screen. He looked at the judge. He closed his briefcase. No, Your Honor, Mr. Vane said. In fact, I would like to request a recess to discuss withdrawing from this case. Denied, the judge barked. You will sit there and you will listen to my ruling. The judge turned his gaze to Malik. Malik was slumped in his chair, looking small and pathetic. The arrogance was gone. The handsome, grieving son was gone. All that was left was a man who had been caught on camera wishing death on his own mother. Mr. Brooks, Judge Holloway said, in my 20 years on the bench, I have seen murderers, thieves, and liars. But I have never seen a display of moral bankruptcy quite like this. Malik tried to stand up. Your Honor? I can explain. It was taken out of context. I was stressed. Sit down, the judge roared. You came into my court, the judge continued, his voice rising. You swore an oath. You accused this woman, your wife, of the very crimes you were committing. You accused her of starvation while we watched your wife throw food in the trash. You accused her of elder abuse while we watched you tell your mother to die. The judge picked up the blue file, the forged medical records. And this is a felony. He looked at the bailiff. Officer, take Mr. Malik Brooks and Mrs. Courtney Brooks into custody immediately. What? Courtney shrieked, jumping up. No, I have a license. I am a pharmacist. Not anymore, you aren't, the judge said. Two officers moved in. They pulled Malik out of his chair. He didn't fight. He looked like he was in shock. His eyes were wide and unseeing. His legs gave out, and the officers had to drag him upright. As they cuffed him, he looked over his shoulder. He looked at me. Zora, he whispered. Zora, please. I looked at him. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel sadness. I just felt clean. I stood up. I smoothed my skirt. I looked him right in the eye. Don't worry, Malik, I said, my voice carrying through the silent courtroom. I will take care of the house. The officers dragged him away. Courtney was screaming, kicking her heels against the floor as they led her out the side door. Andre was sitting in the gallery, trying to hide his face behind his hands, terrified that he was next. Judge Holloway banged his gavel. Case dismissed with prejudice. The deed transfer stands. The defendant, Zora Brooks, is the sole legal owner of the property at 124 Oak Street. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the district attorney for immediate prosecution of perjury, fraud, and elder abuse. He looked at me, and for the first time his expression softened. Mrs. Brooks, I apologize that you had to go through this. You are a good woman. Your mother-in-law was lucky to have you. Thank you. Your Honor, I said. The courtroom erupted. Reporters were shouting questions. People in the gallery were clapping. My phone was vibrating on the table, buzzing with messages from people who had just watched the live stream and were suddenly deleting their hateful comments. Mr. Sterling began packing up his briefcase. He looked at me and smiled. "Well, Mrs. Brooks," he said, "you got the house." I looked at the blank screen where Ms. Pearl's face had been. "I didn't just get the house, Mr. Sterling," I said. "I got her name back." I walked out of the courtroom. The cameras flashed blinding white lights in my face. Microphones were shoved toward me. "Zora. How does it feel, Zora? What will you do with the money? Zora, do you have a message for your husband?" I stopped. I looked into the camera lens just like Miss Pearl had done. "I have a message," I said. I paused, thinking of the empty box, the rusty key, the jar of pickles. "Be careful who you step on to get to the top," I said, "because you never know who is holding the ladder." I pushed through the crowd and walked out into the sunlight. I was free. Malik was in a cell. The house was mine. But the war wasn't over. Not yet. I had the house. But I still had $50 million in stock certificates sitting in a safety deposit box. And I still had a company to take over. I hailed a cab. "Where to?" the driver asked. "Southern Soul Enterprises," I said. "The corporate headquarters." It was time to introduce myself to the board of directors. It was time to show them that the new boss didn't just wear a suit. She wore an apron. And she carried a heavy knife. The adrenaline from the courtroom victory was still coursing through my veins as I followed Mr. Sterling into the private conference room adjacent to the main court hall. The air in here was stale, smelling of old coffee and high-stakes negotiations, but to me it smelled like the finish line. Malik had been dragged away in handcuffs, his expensive suit rumpled and his dignity shredded. Courtney was somewhere in the holding cell screaming about her pharmacy license, but the business of the Brooks estate was not finished. Sitting at the long mahogany table was Andre. He was not in handcuffs yet, but he looked like a man waiting for the executioner. His leg was bouncing nervously under the table, shaking the water pitcher. Next to him sat Mr. Vane Malik's lawyer, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on earth. He was packing his briefcase, ready to cut his losses and run, but Mr. Sterling had legally compelled them to stay. Mr. Sterling closed the heavy door behind us. The lock clicked with the sound of finality. He walked to the head of the table. He did not sit down. He placed his briefcase on the table and opened it. He pulled out the rusted metal box I had dug up from the kitchen floor. Andre stared at it. "What is that?" Andre asked, his voice cracking. Is that from the kitchen?" Mr. Sterling ignored him. He also pulled out a single jar of pickles. Southern Soul pickles, the spicy garlic blend. He placed it in the center of the table like a centerpiece. "Gentlemen," Mr. Sterling began, his voice deep and resonant, "we have settled the matter of the real estate. The house belongs to Zora Brooks, but we have not yet discussed the remainder of Pearl Brooks's estate." Mr. Vane scoffed. "With all due respect, Counselor, what estate? The woman lived on a pension. She had a house and a car. That is it. My client may have lost the house, but let us not pretend there is anything else to fight over." Mr. Sterling smiled. It was the smile of a man holding a royal flush. "You are laboring under a misconception, Mr. Vane. You believe Pearl Brooks was a consumer of goods. In reality, she was a producer." He pointed to the jar of pickles. "Do you know this brand, Mr. Vane?" "Everyone knows it," Mr. Vane said dismissively. "It is the best-selling pickle brand in the Southeast. What does that have to do with anything?" Mr. Sterling tapped the jar. "Pearl Brooks founded this company in 1980. She developed the recipes. She designed the logo. And for 40 years she remained the silent majority shareholder." Andre let out a strangled sound. "No, that is impossible. Mama was broke. She clipped coupons." Mr. Sterling opened the metal box. He pulled out the stack of stock certificates. He fanned them out on the table. "She lived modestly because she was building an empire, Andre. She reinvested 90% of her dividends back into the company. She wanted to build something that would last. Something that would take care of her family for generations." He pushed the papers toward Mr. Vane. "These are the original stock certificates. 10,000 shares of Class A voting stock. Pearl Brooks owned 51% of Southern Soul Enterprises." Mr. Vane picked up the papers. His hands started to shake. He adjusted his glasses. He looked at the numbers. He looked at the valuation. "My God," he whispered. What Andre demanded, standing up. "What is it? How much is it worth?" Mr. Vane looked at Andre with wide eyes. "Based on the last quarterly valuation of the company, this stack of paper is worth approximately $52 million. The room went silent. $52 million. Andre fell back into his chair. His mouth hung open. He looked like he had been hit by a train. 50 million, he wheezed. Mama had $50 million. And we were trying to sell her house for 1.5. He put his head in his hands. We are rich. We are rich. Malik is going to flip. We can pay the lawyers. We can get him out. $50 million. I sat there quietly watching him. I watched the greed wash over his panic. I watched him forget about his dead mother and his incarcerated brother and focus instantly on the money. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. "Not so fast, Mr. Brooks." Andre looked up, a manic grin on his face. "What do you mean?" "We are the heirs. If the deed transfer to Zora was just for the house, then the rest of the estate goes to the next of kin. That is the law. Malik and I split the company." "That would be true," Mr. Sterling said, pulling another document from the box, "if it were not for the last will and testament of Pearl Brooks." He unfolded the document I had read in the bank vault. Andre laughed nervously. "Okay, so she wrote a will. She probably left a little something to charity, maybe something to Zora. But the bulk has to come to us. We are her blood." Mr. Sterling put on his reading glasses. "I will skip the preamble," he said. "Let us go straight to Article 4. The disinheritance clause." The smile vanished from Andre's face. Mr. Sterling began to read. "I, Pearl Brooks, being of sound mind, am aware that my health is failing. I am aware that my care will become a burden. I have watched my sons view my illness not as a tragedy, but as an inconvenience. Therefore, I include this clause to protect my dignity in my final days. If any beneficiary of this will, whether they be my children or my grandchildren, attempts to conspire to or discusses placing me in a state-run nursing facility against my wishes." Mr. Sterling paused. He looked over his glasses at Andre. "Or if any beneficiary attempts to deprive me of medical care or sustenance in order to expedite my death, then that beneficiary shall be immediately and irrevocably stripped of all inheritance rights. They shall receive 0% of my estate. Not 1 penny, not 1 share of stock." Andre went pale. But we never did that," he stammered. "We never put her in a home. She died in her own bed." Mr. Sterling nodded. "She did die in her own bed. Thanks to Zora. But the clause does not say you had to succeed. It says, if you discussed it, if you conspired." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small digital audio recorder. "Do you remember the visit you made with Courtney, Mr. Brooks? The one 2 weeks into Zora's caretaking. The one where Courtney wore the white gloves." Andre started shaking his head. "No. No." Mr. Sterling pressed play. The audio was crisp and clear. It was the sound of the kitchen. Courtney's voice. "Honey, look at this place. It is not sanitary. Zora is overwhelmed. It is cruel to keep Pearl here." Andre's voice. "Yeah, maybe it is time we look at that state facility off the highway. The one the government subsidizes." Courtney's voice. "If Pearl goes to the facility, we can sell this place. Malik and Andre can split the equity. It is what Pearl would want. She would not want to be a burden." Mr. Sterling stopped the tape. That recording, Mr. Sterling said, his voice cold, was captured by the same security system that just convicted your brother of fraud. It is dated and time-stamped. He looked at Andre with eyes like flint. "You discussed putting a $50 million woman into a state facility that smells of urine just so you could sell her house for a quick payday. You triggered the clause, Andre." Andre looked at Mr. Vane. "Do something," he screamed. You are the lawyer. Fight this. That recording is illegal. Mr. Vane closed his briefcase. He stood up. Actually, Mr. Vane said, his tone completely changed. It is perfectly legal in the state of Georgia. It is a one-party consent state. And since Pearl Brooks authorized the recording, she consented. He looked at Andre with disgust. You have no case, Mr. Brooks. The clause is ironclad. You are disinherited. Andre looked at me. His eyes were wild. Zora, Zora, please. You can't let them do this. We are family. Malik made mistakes, but he is your husband. Half of this is yours, which means half is his. Community property. I stood up. I walked over to the table and picked up the jar of pickles. Actually, Andre, I said calmly, I signed a divorce decree yesterday. Malik was very specific. He wanted a clean break. He wanted to keep his assets separate from mine. I smiled. He got the Honda Civic. I got the rest. Andre slumped onto the table, burying his face in his arms. He began to sob, not for his mother, but for the life he almost had. Mr. Sterling handed a pen to me. Mrs. Brooks, if you would please sign here. This transfers the controlling interest of Southern Soul Enterprises to you effectively, immediately. I took the pen. I looked at the signature line. I thought about Miss Pearl. I thought about the way she looked when she handed me this jar. She didn't just give me money. She gave me a weapon to fight back against the people who had made me feel small for years. I signed my name, Zora Brooks, CEO. Mr. Sterling gathered the papers. It is done, he said. He turned to Mr. Vane. You can inform your client in the holding cell. He is indigent. He has no assets, no home, no company. And since he has no money, I assume you will be resigning as his counsel. Mr. Vane nodded. I will file the paperwork today. Good luck, Mrs. Brooks. You earned this. Mr. Vane walked out. Andre lifted his head. He looked at me with red, swollen eyes. What are you going to do, Zora? Are you going to keep it all? $50 million. You can't spend that in a lifetime. Give us something. Anything. I looked at him. I thought about the ramen noodles. I thought about the days I went hungry. I am not going to keep it all, Andre, I said. Hope flickered in his eyes. I am going to invest it, I said. I am going to build a new factory. I am going to create jobs. And I am going to start a foundation in Ms. Pearl's name to help elderly people who are being abused by their greedy families. I walked to the door. And as for you, Andre, and Malik, and Courtney. I paused, holding the pickle jar tight. Ms. Pearl left instructions for you, too. What Andre whispered. What did she leave us? I reached into my pocket and pulled out 3 coupons. I tossed them onto the table. They fluttered down, landing in front of him. They were coupons for Southern Soul pickles, 50 cents off any jar. She wanted you to have a taste of the family business, I said. I opened the door and walked out. I walked through the courthouse hallways, my heels clicking on the marble. I felt lighter than air. The $50 million didn't just mean wealth. It meant I never had to answer to anyone again. It meant I could cook what I wanted, live where I wanted, and love who I wanted. I walked out into the street. The sun was setting, painting the Atlanta skyline in shades of gold and purple. I took out my phone. I called the number for the board of directors of Southern Soul. This is Zora Brooks, I said when they answered. There was a pause. Then a respectful voice answered. Good evening, Mrs. Brooks. We have been waiting for your call. I am calling to call an emergency meeting, I said. Of course. What is the agenda? I looked at the jar in my hand. The agenda is simple, I said. We are going to change the label. I want Miss Pearl's face on every single jar. Big, smiling. So that every time my ex-husband walks down a grocery aisle, he has to look her in the eye. I hung up the phone. I hailed a cab. I gave the driver the address of the finest restaurant in the city. The one where I used to work as a line cook. Tonight I wasn't going in the back door. I was going in the front. And I was going to order the most expensive soup on the menu. Because Ms. Pearl was right. Soup really is good for the soul, especially when it is served with a side of $50 million. The wheels of justice turn slowly, but when they finally crush you, they grind you into dust. I watched from the steps of the courthouse as the final act of Malik's tragedy unfolded. He had been released from the holding cell on the initial fraud charges, pending bail, but he had not made it to the curb. He was standing there blinking in the sunlight, looking like a man who had just survived a shipwreck, only to realize he was stranded on a desert island. He was trying to call an Uber, but his fingers were shaking so badly he dropped his phone. That was when the second wave hit. Two unmarked black sedans pulled up to the curb, screeching to a halt. Four agents in windbreakers stepped out. On the back of their jackets in bold yellow letters were the words, "Department of Insurance Fraud." Malik froze. He looked at the agents, then he looked at me standing at the top of the stairs. He knew. In that split second, he knew that I had given Mr. Sterling the rest of the metal box. The agents did not ask him nicely to come with them. They spun him around and slammed him against the hood of the rental car he could no longer pay for. Malik Brooks, one of the agents, shouted, his voice carrying over the traffic. "You are under arrest for 18 counts of felony insurance fraud, grand theft by deception, and money laundering." Malik screamed. "What are you talking about? I never committed insurance fraud. This is a mistake." "It is no mistake," the agent said, snapping the cuffs on tighter than before. "We have the records, Mr. Brooks. We know about the reimbursement checks." "The reimbursement checks?" I stood there and watched the color drain from Malik's face. He thought he had been so clever. For 6 months, while I was begging for money to pay for Ms. Pearl's chemotherapy, Malik had been submitting claims to her private health insurance provider. He had been submitting forged receipts for treatments he claimed he paid for out of pocket. The insurance company had been mailing reimbursement checks to a P.O. box in Miami. 18 checks, totaling $200,000. He had stolen the money meant to save his mother's life and used it to pay for bottle service at the Fontainebleau. He had literally converted his mother's blood into champagne. They shoved him into the back of the unmarked car. He pressed his face against the glass, screaming my name, screaming for help. But nobody was listening. The only person who could have saved him was the woman he had let die. I turned my gaze to the sidewalk where Courtney and Andre were standing. They had watched the whole thing. Andre looked like a ghost. He was holding his stomach as if he were going to be sick. Courtney, however, looked like a calculator. I could see the gears turning in her head. She was doing the math of her life, and the numbers were coming up zero. She looked at the police car driving away with Malik. Then she looked at Andre. Andre reached out to touch her arm. "Baby," he stammered. "Baby, we have to call a bondsman. We have to." "Don't touch me," Courtney hissed. She pulled her arm away as if he were contagious. Andre blinked. "Courtney, what are you doing? We are in this together. We are family." Courtney laughed. It was a sharp, brittle sound like glass breaking. "Family," she spat. "You are broke, Andre. Your brother is going to prison for 20 years. Your mother disinherited you. You have nothing. You are nothing." She reached into her purse and pulled out a set of keys. She threw them at his chest. They hit him and clattered to the pavement. "Those are the keys to the apartment," she said. "I am taking the car. My name is on the lease, so you have until tonight to get your junk out." Andre stared at her. "You are leaving me. Now. In the middle of the street." "I am not sinking with this ship," Courtney said, fixing her hair. "I am young. I am beautiful. And I am a pharmacist. I can find a man who isn't a loser. I am deleting your number, Andre. Do not contact me." She turned on her heel and began to walk away. Her head held high, expecting to march into a new life where she was the victim of the Brooks family drama. But karma was not done with her yet. As she reached the corner, a man in a gray suit stepped out from behind a pillar. He blocked her path. He was holding a clipboard. "Courtney Brooks?" he asked. She stopped, annoyed. "Yes." Who are you? I am from the state of Georgia Board of Pharmacy, the man said. Courtney's face went white. He handed her a thick envelope. We received a referral from the district attorney's office regarding your admission of forging medical records and creating fraudulent prescriptions for controlled substances. Courtney started to shake. No. No, that was a misunderstanding. I was under duress. The board takes a very dim view of felonies involving narcotics, the man said, his voice devoid of sympathy. This is an emergency suspension order. Your license to practice pharmacy in the state of Georgia is hereby revoked, effective immediately pending a formal hearing. Revoked, Courtney whispered. But that is my career. That is how I make money. You should have thought of that before you used your prescription pad to commit elder abuse, the man said. He turned and walked away, leaving her standing on the street corner. She stood there for a long time. She looked down at her hands, the hands that had thrown away Ms. Pearl's soup, the hands that had forged the documents. They were shaking uncontrollably. She was not a pharmacist anymore. She was an unemployed woman with a felony pending and a husband she had just discarded. Andre watched her from the distance. He didn't go to her. He just picked up the keys from the sidewalk, put his hands in his pockets, and walked away in the opposite direction. The pack had turned on itself. The wolves had eaten each other. I walked down the steps of the courthouse. I walked past Courtney, who was sobbing into her phone trying to call her mother. She didn't even see me. I was invisible to her again, but this time it was because she was blinded by her own ruin. I got into my car. I drove to the cemetery. I sat by Ms. Pearl's fresh grave for an hour. I didn't say much. I just told her that the accounts were balanced. The ledger was closed. 3 days later, I was sitting in my new office at the headquarters of Southern Soul Enterprises. The office was beautiful. It smelled of leather and lemon polish. On the desk sat the jar of pickles that had started it all. My secretary buzzed in. "Mrs. Brooks," she said, "there is a collect call from the Fulton County Jail. It is an inmate named Malik Brooks. Do you wish to accept the charges?" I paused. My finger hovered over the button. Part of me wanted to decline. Part of me wanted to leave him in the silence he had created. But I knew that true closure required one last sound. "Put him through," I said. There was a click, then the automated voice saying, "This call is being recorded," and then heavy breathing. "Zora." His voice was unrecognizable. It was cracked and hoarse. The smooth arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, trembling tone. "Hello, Malik," I said, leaning back in my leather chair. "Zora, please don't hang up," he begged. "I have used all my phone time trying to reach you. Andre won't answer." Courtney changed her number. "You are the only one." I didn't say anything. I just listened to the background noise of the jail, the shouting, the clanging of metal doors. "Zora, I need help," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "It is bad in here. I am in protective custody because of the high profile of the case, but God, Zora, the food. You can't eat it. It is slop. It smells like rot. I haven't eaten in 2 days." I looked at the menu for the company cafeteria sitting on my desk. Today they were serving braised short ribs and truffle mashed potatoes. "That sounds uncomfortable," Malik, I said. "I need money on my books," he said. "Just a little. Just so I can buy some ramen and chips from the commissary. I am starving, Zora. My stomach hurts so bad. Starving," I repeated. "Yes, starving," he cried. "Please, Zora, I know you hate me. I know I messed up. But have some mercy. Just send me $100. That is all I ask. $100 for food. $100. I remembered the $500 he left me for 6 months. I remembered the hunger pains I felt when I skipped dinner so Ms. Pearl could have her medicine. I remembered him sitting in the courtroom accusing me of starving his mother while he feasted in Miami. The irony was so sharp it could cut glass. "Malik," I said, my voice calm and steady, "do you remember what you told me when you left for Dubai?" There was silence on the line. "You told me I was a chef," I said. "You told me I knew how to stretch a dollar. You told me to make it work." "Zora, please?" You are in a difficult situation, Malik, I continued. But look at the bright side. You finally have what you wanted. You have a roof over your head that you don't have to pay for. You have security. And you have plenty of time to think about the value of things. Zora, send the money. He screamed, his desperation turning back into rage. You owe me. I made you. You didn't make me, Malik, I said. You broke me. And then I built myself back up with the pieces you threw away. I reached for the disconnect button. I can't send you $100, Malik. Why not? He sobbed. You have 50 million. Why not? Because I said, I am saving my money for people who actually matter. But Zora. Goodbye, Malik. Enjoy the soup. I pressed the button. The line went dead. I sat there for a moment in the silence of my office. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, a weight I had been carrying for years. The weight of his judgment, his cruelty, his selfishness. It was gone. He was just a voice in a box now, a ghost in a cage. My stomach growled. I realized I was hungry. I stood up and walked out of the office. I walked down the hall to the test kitchen where the chefs were experimenting with new recipes for the upcoming season. The head chef looked up as I entered. Mrs. Brooks, he said, smiling, we are working on a new brine for the spicy dills. Want to taste? I walked over to the counter. I picked up a cucumber slice. I took a bite. It was crisp. It was sour. It was spicy. It tasted like freedom. I smiled at the chef. It is perfect, I said. Pack it up. We are going to sell millions. I walked to the window and looked out at the city of Atlanta. Somewhere down there in a concrete cell, Malik Brooks was hungry. Somewhere down there, Courtney was standing in an unemployment line. Somewhere down there, Andre was sleeping on a friend's couch. And up here on the top floor, Zora Brooks was just getting started. I took another bite of the pickle. Digging in the dirt is dirty work. But the harvest is sweet. They say you can never go home again, especially when that home was a mausoleum of trauma. They say that when a house has seen as much betrayal and sickness as 124 Oak Street, you should bulldoze it, salt the earth, and never look back. I did the bulldozing part. The excavators came in 3 months after the trial. They tore down the rotting walls where Courtney had sneered at me. They ripped up the floorboards where Malik had paced while wishing for his mother death. They crushed the guest room where I had slept on a lumpy mattress praying for a miracle. But I did not salt the earth. I knew the value of dirt. Ms. Pearl taught me that. The dirt was not the problem. The poison was the people standing on it. Once the poison was removed, the soil was ready to bear fruit again. Tonight is the 1-year anniversary of the day I found the metal box. And tonight, 124 Oak Street does not smell like bleach and despair. It smells of saffron and roasting garlic. It smells of cognac reduction and fresh baked brioche. It smells like victory. I stood at the pass of the open kitchen, adjusting the cuffs of my chef coat. This was not the stained uniform of a sous chef working double shifts to pay the bills. This was a custom-tailored Egyptian cotton jacket embroidered with gold thread. On the left breast, right over my heart, it said, Zora Brooks, Executive Chef and Owner. I looked out into the dining room. The restaurant was called Pearl's Kitchen. I had kept the name simple, but the space was anything but. The walls were lined with velvet. The chandeliers dripped with crystals that caught the light like diamonds, and every single table was full. There was the mayor of Atlanta sitting at table 4 laughing with a senator. There were food critics from New York and Los Angeles at table 9 dissecting the appetizers with reverence. And at the bar, there was a line of people waiting 2 hours just to get a taste of the most famous dish in the country. The waiter walked by carrying a silver tray. On it sat a single crystal bowl containing 3 perfect emerald green pickles. Order up table 12, he said. The $1,000,000 pickles. I smiled. We actually called them that on the menu. The spicy garlic blend, number 404. The same recipe Ms. Pearl had forced me to memorize on her deathbed. We served them with a dollop of creme fraiche and a sprinkle of gold leaf. People paid $50 for that bowl. They didn't just pay for the taste, they paid for the story. The story of the grandmother who hid an empire in a jar and the daughter-in-law who dug it up. Southern Soul Enterprises had tripled in value since I took over. We had expanded into organic markets. We had launched a line of hot sauces, and we had created the Pearl Brooks Foundation, which now funded legal defense for elderly abuse victims across the state. But my pride was not in the stock price. It was in this room. I walked out of the kitchen, moving through the dining room. I stopped at table 1. It was the best table in the house, right by the fireplace. It was set for one. Fine china crystal glass, a single white rose in a vase. It was empty. It was always empty. Reserved read the small brass sign on the table. I reached out and touched the back of the empty chair. This was Ms. Pearl's table. Every night we set it. Every night we poured a glass of her favorite tea. It was my reminder. I was not the owner of this success, I was the steward. Mrs. Brooks. I turned. A young woman was standing there looking nervous. She was holding a notebook. I am from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, she said. I know you are busy with the grand opening, but could I get a quote? Everyone wants to know the secret. How did you go from a widow with $12 to this? I looked at her. She reminded me of myself 10 years ago. Hungry, eager. I looked around the room. It is not a secret, I said. It is a recipe. You take a lot of patience. You add a lot of pain. You let it ferment in the dark for a while. And when the time is right, you open the jar. She scribbled furiously. And what about the family? She asked, lowering her voice. Your ex-husband, his brother. Do you ever hear from them? I paused. The noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away for a second. I heard from Malik 6 months ago. He sent a letter from the state penitentiary. He is working in the laundry detail, making 12 cents an hour. He wanted to know if I could send him a jar of pickles. He said he missed the taste of home. Did you send it? The reporter asked. I shook my head. No. I sent him the empty jar. I told him he could fill it with whatever he made with his own hands. The reporter smiled. And the others. Courtney is working at a diner in Alabama, I said. She lost her license permanently. I hear she complains to the customers that she used to be rich. Andre is driving a delivery truck for a furniture company. They are living the lives they were so afraid of. They are working for a living. I looked back at the kitchen. My staff was moving like a ballet. Efficient, passionate. They are the past, I said. This is the future. I walked back into the kitchen. The heat of the stoves hit me like a warm embrace. This was my domain. I picked up a tasting spoon and dipped it into the large copper pot simmering on the back burner. It was the soup, the bone broth, the liquid gold that had proven my love to Ms. Pearl. I tasted it. It was rich, deep, and complex. It tasted like comfort. Perfect, I whispered. I walked to the back of the kitchen to the private office that overlooked the main floor. I opened the door and stepped inside. It was quiet in here. On the wall facing my desk hung a massive portrait. It was 6 feet tall, painted by the finest artist in the city. It was Ms. Pearl. But it was not the sick, frail woman in the hospital bed. It was Ms. Pearl as she saw herself. She was wearing a royal blue suit, sitting on a throne made of pickle crates. She was holding a pen in one hand and a spoon in the other. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and full of mischief. I stood in front of the painting. We did it, Miss Pearl, I said softly. The peacocks are gone. The roots are watered. I felt a sudden warmth in my chest, a feeling of absolute lightness. I was 35 years old. I was single. I was wealthy beyond my wildest dreams. But more than that, I was free. I walked to the desk and sat down. I opened the top drawer. Inside sat the old rusted metal box. I kept it there to remind me. I ran my fingers over the rough metal. I thought about the night of the storm, the fear, the darkness, the sound of the thunder shaking the house. I thought about how close I had come to walking away. I could have taken the Honda and left. I could have let them win. But I dug. I looked at the camera recording the final vlog entry for my channel. which had now grown to 5 million subscribers following the journey of the restaurant opening. I pressed record. The red light blinked. Hello, everyone. It is Zora. I smiled at the lens. Tonight we open the doors to Pearl's kitchen. The line is around the block. The reviews are already coming in, and they are saying the food is 5 stars. But you guys know the real story. You know that the most expensive ingredient in this kitchen isn't the truffle oil or the Wagyu beef. I picked up the jar of pickles from my desk. It is loyalty. I leaned into the camera. I want to leave you with this thought tonight. I know some of you are going through it right now. I know you are feeling unappreciated. I know you are surrounded by people who take from you and give nothing back. I know you feel like you are buried in dirt. But remember what a seed does when it is buried in dirt. It grows. I held up the jar one last time, the golden liquid catching the light. Sometimes you have to dig deep into the darkness to find the light. And sometimes real value lies under an old pickle jar. I winked. Thank you for listening. I turned off the camera. I stood up and walked back out to the kitchen. The dinner rush was hitting its peak. The tickets were printing. The pans were sizzling. The chefs looked at me, waiting for orders. Chef on deck, the sous chef shouted. I tied my apron tighter. I picked up my knife, the Japanese shun knife I had bought back from the pawn shop for 10 times what I sold it for. Let us feed them, I said. And as I sliced through the vegetables on the cutting board, I swear I could hear Miss Pearl laughing. It was a good sound. It was the sound of a woman who had the last word. The story was over. The legacy had begun. Zora's journey reminds us that true integrity is often cultivated in the dark long before the world sees the harvest. While Malik chased superficial status and neglected his own mother, Zora found value in the humble, exhausting act of caretaking. This story teaches us that the greatest treasures are often buried beneath the mundane, like a rusty box or a simple jar of pickles, invisible to those blinded by greed. It is a powerful testament that your worth is not defined by how others treat you in your lowest moments, but by the dignity you maintain when no one is watching. Eventually, the roots of kindness you water will always outlive the weeds of betrayal. Have you ever remained silent while someone underestimated you, only to let your success make the noise? Later, I would love to hear your story of vindication in the comments below. Please hit the like button and subscribe if you believe that justice always finds a way.